Hello everyone, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first camera I found was in the shower head. The second was nestled in the eye of a teddy bear. By the time I discovered the third, hidden behind a vent in the master bedroom, I knew I was in serious trouble. It was supposed to be an easy night of babysitting. The Wilsons were new to the neighborhood, having just moved into the sprawling Victorian mansion at the end of our street. When Mrs. Wilson approached me after church last Sunday, her perfectly manicured nails tapping my shoulder, I jumped at the chance to make some extra cash. "We'll only be gone for a few hours," she had said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Tommy's an angel. He'll be in bed by 8, and you'll have the run of the house." Now, as I stood in the center of their opulent living room, my heart pounding against my ribs, I realized just how wrong I'd been to trust that smile. The house was silent, save for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Tommy had gone to bed without a fuss, just as his mother promised. It was only after I'd settled onto the plush leather couch, ready to dive into my homework, that I noticed something odd about the antique mirror hanging on the opposite wall. A tiny red light blinked in the corner of the ornate frame, almost imperceptible. Curiosity piqued. I approached it, my reflection growing larger with each step. That's when I saw it. A lens no bigger than a pinhead embedded in the glass. My blood ran cold. A camera. Someone was watching me. Panic set in as I began to search the room, my eyes darting from one shadowy corner to the next. The more I looked, the more I found. A camera in the bookshelf, another in the light fixture, one even hidden in the potted plant by the window. My mind raced. Were the Wilsons secretly filming me? Or was someone else watching? Someone who had invaded their home just as they had invited me in? I sprinted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, my socks slipping on the polished wood. I had to check on Tommy. His room was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of a nightlight. I crept to his bed, relief washing over me as I saw his small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. But as I turned to leave, my eye caught something on his dresser. The teddy bear sat innocently among his other stuffed animals, its glassy eyes reflecting the dim light. But one eye was different. It glinted unnaturally, and as I leaned in closer, my suspicions were confirmed. Another camera. My stomach churned. I had to get out of here, had to call the police. But as I reached for my phone, I realized with horror that I'd left it downstairs on the coffee table. I descended the stairs slowly, each creak of the old wood sending shivers down my spine. The house felt different now, sinister. Every shadow seemed to hide another lens, another eye watching my every move. As I entered the living room, my gaze immediately fell on my phone. It wasn't where I'd left it. Instead, it sat in the center of the coffee table, screen up, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. I snatched it up, my trembling fingers fumbling with the passcode. No signal. Of course, the Wilsons' house was notorious for its poor reception. I'd have to use their landline. I made my way to the kitchen, where I'd seen a phone mounted on the wall earlier. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The phone was gone, leaving behind only an empty bracket and a few frayed wires. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't just surveillance anymore. Someone was in the house with me, moving things, cutting off my means of communication. I was trapped. I ran to the front door, yanking on the handle. Locked. I hadn't locked it earlier. I was sure of it. Panic clawed at my throat as I tried the windows, each one secured tightly. A noise from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, creaking across the floorboards. They were coming from Tommy's room. I had to get to him. Camera or no camera, I couldn't leave that little boy alone with whoever was up there. I grabbed a heavy candlestick from the mantel, its weight reassuring in my grip, and began to climb the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity, the old wood groaning beneath my feet. The footsteps above had stopped, but I could hear something else now. a low murmur, like someone talking softly. I reached the landing, pressing myself against the wall. Tommy's door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. I inched closer, straining to hear. "That's right, Tommy. You're doing so well, just like we practiced." The voice was unfamiliar, deep and soothing. My blood turned to ice. What were they doing to him? I peered through the crack in the door, and the scene before me made my heart stop. Tommy sat cross-legged on his bed, eyes wide and unfocused. In front of him stood a man I'd never seen before, tall and lean, dressed all in black. But it was the object in his hands that made my breath catch in my throat. A tablet. On its screen, I could see multiple video feeds: the living room, the kitchen, the hallway where I now stood. He was watching everything. I must have made a sound, a gasp, or a whimper, because the man's head snapped towards the door. Our eyes met through the narrow opening, and for a moment, time stood still. Then he smiled. It was a terrible thing, that smile, full of malice and triumph. "Ah," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Our guest of honor has arrived. Won't you join us?" I didn't think. I ran, down the stairs, through the living room, my feet barely touching the ground. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps thundering, gaining on me with every second. The back door. It was my last hope. I skidded into the kitchen, my socks sliding on the tile, and lunged for the handle. It turned. Thank God. It turned. I burst into the backyard, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through my socks as I sprinted across the lawn. The high fence loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. I reached it, my fingers scrabbling at the rough wood as I tried to pull myself up. Behind me, I heard the back door slam open. He was out of the house. "You can't run forever," he called, his voice calm and confident. "This is my game, and I know every move." I hauled myself over the fence, landing hard on the other side. I was in the neighbor's yard now, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran through unfamiliar gardens, vaulting over low fences and ducking under clotheslines. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed on. I had to get help, had to save Tommy. The streets of the neighborhood blurred past me as I ran, houses dark and silent. Why wasn't anyone awake? Why weren't there any cars? It wasn't until I reached the end of the street that I realized something was terribly wrong. The road simply ended. Beyond it was nothing but an empty blackness, as if the world itself had been cut off. I turned, desperate, looking for another way out. But everywhere I looked, I saw the same thing. Darkness encroaching, swallowing up the edges of the neighborhood. And in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, I heard his footsteps. "You see now, don't you?" His voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. There's no escape. There never was. I sank to my knees, the damp grass soaking through my jeans. As the darkness closed in around me, I saw him emerge from between two houses, that terrible smile still plastered on his face. "Don't worry," he said, kneeling down beside me. "You're going to be a star." The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the blinking red light of a camera, recording every moment of my defeat. I jolted awake with a gasp, my heart racing. The familiar surroundings of my bedroom slowly came into focus. It had been a dream, just a terrible, vivid dream. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, desperate to ground myself in reality. As the screen lit up, a notification caught my eye. A new email, sent just moments ago. With trembling fingers, I opened it. There was no message, just an attachment, a video file. As I hit play, my blood ran cold. There I was, running through an endless neighborhood, terror etched on my face. And behind me, always behind me, was him. The camera blinked, its red light a silent witness to my newfound nightmare. The first snap of the twig could have been a deer, the second, maybe a raccoon, but the third, followed by hushed voices, told me I wasn't alone in these God-forsaken woods, and whatever I'd stumbled upon, I wasn't meant to find. I'd set out at dawn, my backpack laden with enough supplies for a 3-day hike through the Adirondacks. The trail was supposed to be easy, a well-marked path that even novice hikers could navigate. But somewhere around noon, I'd taken a wrong turn. Or maybe the turn I'd taken was right, and the map was wrong. Either way, I found myself in a part of the forest that felt older, wilder than where I'd started. The trees here grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy so thick that only slivers of sunlight managed to penetrate. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As the hours wore on and the light began to fade, I realized I was well and truly lost. I should have stopped then, should have made camp and waited for daylight. But panic had started to set in, driving me forward in the desperate hope that I'd stumble upon a ranger station or a road, anything that could lead me back to civilization. It was in this state of near exhaustion and mounting fear that I first saw the flicker of light through the trees. A campfire, I thought, relief washing over me. Other hikers, maybe, or a park ranger, someone who could help me find my way back. I pushed through a dense thicket, branches scratching at my face and arms, and emerged into a small clearing. What I saw there made me freeze, my heart leaping into my throat. It wasn't a campsite, at least not any kind I'd ever seen. A large, military-style tent dominated the center of the clearing. Around it, crates were stacked haphazardly, their contents hidden, but their purpose clear. This was no casual camping trip. This was an operation. I should have left then, should have turned and ran as fast and as far as I could. But curiosity, that damned human trait, kept me rooted to the spot. I crept closer, my feet moving of their own accord. The tent flap was partially open, and I could see movement inside. Shadows danced on the canvas, accompanied by the low murmur of voices. I strained to hear what they were saying, but the words were indistinct, muffled by the rustle of leaves and the pounding of my own heart. I was so focused on the tent that I almost missed the other details. The fresh tire tracks leading into the clearing, too wide for any ATV. The sophisticated-looking equipment scattered around, decidedly not standard camping gear. And there, half hidden under a tarp, something that made my blood run cold. Guns, not hunting rifles, but serious, military-grade weapons. I'd stumbled onto something big, something illegal. My mind raced with possibilities. Drug runners, arms dealers, whatever it was, I knew I was in way over my head. I started to back away, trying to retrace my steps without making a sound. But in my haste, I forgot to look where I was going. My foot came down on a fallen branch, and the crack echoed through the clearing like a gunshot. The voices in the tent stopped abruptly. I heard the scrape of a chair, footsteps approaching. Panic seized me, and I dove behind the nearest tree, pressing myself against the rough bark. "Check the perimeter," a gruff voice commanded. "Could be an animal, but I'm not taking any chances." I heard them fan out, their footsteps crunching on the leaf-strewn ground. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it. I tried to control my breathing, to make myself as small and quiet as possible. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth. They had flashlights. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying they wouldn't come my way. "Nothing over here, boss," a voice called out, too close for comfort. "Keep looking," the gruff voice responded. "If it's a ranger, we need to know." I opened my eyes a crack, trying to gauge how many of them there were. Through the gloom, I could make out at least 3 figures moving through the trees, maybe more back at the camp. Too many for me to outrun or overpower. I needed a plan. I couldn't stay here forever, and sooner or later they'd find me. I looked around frantically, searching for an escape route. The forest seemed to close in around me, every direction looking equally dark and foreboding. That's when I saw it. A small gap between 2 large boulders, half hidden by a fallen log. It was a tight squeeze. but it might just be big enough for me to slip through. And if I was lucky, it might lead to a way out. I waited until the nearest searcher had his back turned, then made my move. Crouching low, I scurried across the open ground, my heart in my mouth. Just as I reached the boulders, I heard a shout. "Hey, over there!" I didn't look back. I dove for the gap, ignoring the sharp rocks that scraped my sides. It was a tighter fit than I'd thought, and for one terrifying moment, I thought I was stuck. But with a final, desperate wriggle, I slipped through. I found myself in a narrow ravine, the walls rising steep and high on either side. Without pausing to catch my breath, I started to run, stumbling over loose rocks and exposed roots. Behind me, I could hear shouting and the beam of flashlights. They knew where I'd gone, and they were coming after me. The ravine twisted and turned, and I followed it blindly, praying it wouldn't lead to a dead end. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. The sounds of pursuit seemed to be getting closer. Or was that just my imagination, fueled by fear and exhaustion? Just when I thought I couldn't go on any further, the ravine opened up. I burst out onto a wider trail, clearly man-made, a hiking trail. In the distance, I could see lights, a ranger station, or maybe a campground. Safety. I ran towards the lights, my feet pounding on the packed earth. Behind me, I heard frustrated shouts echoing from the ravine. They'd lost my trail. As I neared the lights, I saw it was indeed a ranger station. A lone figure stood outside, peering into the darkness at the sound of my approach. "Help!" I gasped, stumbling the last few yards. "Please, you have to help me." The ranger, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, and caught me as I nearly collapsed. "Easy there," she said, her voice calm but alert. "What's happened? Are you hurt?" Between gasping breaths, I tried to explain what I'd seen, the camp, the weapons, the men chasing me. The ranger's expression grew grave as she listened. "Let's get you inside," she said, guiding me towards the station. "I need to call this in." As we entered the warm, brightly lit building, I felt the adrenaline start to fade, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. The ranger sat me down, handed me a bottle of water, and went to make her call. I sipped the water slowly, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. Part of me still couldn't believe it was real, but the scratches on my arms, the mud on my clothes, and the lingering fear in my gut told me otherwise. The ranger returned, her face serious. "I've alerted the authorities," she said. "They're sending a team out now, but it'll take them some time to get here. In the meantime, I need you to tell me everything you saw, every detail, no matter how small." I nodded, taking a deep breath. As I began to recount my story, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever I'd stumbled upon out there in the woods, it was bigger than me, bigger than this small ranger station in the middle of nowhere. And as the night wore on, with the ranger taking notes and the clock ticking towards dawn, I wondered if I'd ever feel safe in the wilderness again. The forest, once a place of solace and adventure, now held shadows I couldn't unsee. But as I finished my tale and saw the determination in the ranger's eyes, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever was out there, whatever dark operation I'd uncovered, it wouldn't remain hidden for long. And maybe, just maybe, my ill-fated hike would lead to something good after all. As the first light of dawn began to peek through the windows, I heard the distant sound of helicopters approaching. Help was coming, and with it, the promise of answers to the mysteries hidden in the depths of the forest. The lock clicked shut with a finality that made my skin crawl. I yanked at the door handle, once, twice, 3 times, but it wouldn't budge. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We were trapped, and whoever had locked us in was still out there. It was supposed to be a quick overnight stay, just a place to rest our heads before continuing our cross-country road trip. Sarah and I had been driving for hours, our eyes heavy with exhaustion, when we spotted the neon vacancy. sign of the Pine Grove Motel flickering in the darkness. The place looked like it had seen better days, paint peeling from the wooden siding and weeds pushing up through cracks in the parking lot. But it was cheap, and we were too tired to care about aesthetics. The night clerk, a wiry man with thinning hair and nicotine-stained fingers, barely looked up from his dog-eared paperback as he handed us the key to room 13. "Checkout's at 11, he mumbled, his voice as worn as the motel itself. Our room was small and musty, with faded floral wallpaper and a sagging queen-sized bed, but it had a shower with hot water and clean towels, which felt like luxury after hours on the road. "It's just for one night," Sarah said, trying to sound optimistic as she tested the lumpy mattress. "We'll be back on the road before we know it." If only we'd known then how wrong she was. The trouble started around 2 a.m. I was jolted awake by a sound I couldn't quite place, a scraping, metallic noise that seemed to be coming from just outside our door. At first, I thought I was dreaming, the remnants of a nightmare clinging to my consciousness. But then I heard it again, louder this time, followed by hushed voices. I nudged Sarah awake, pressing a finger to my lips to keep her quiet. She blinked at me in confusion, then froze as the noises outside grew more distinct. Someone was definitely out there, and they were trying to get in. We scrambled out of bed, our hearts pounding in unison. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, ready to call for help, but my stomach dropped when I saw the no service geared message glaring back at me. "Try the landline," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I picked up the ancient-looking phone on the bedside table and put it to my ear. Nothing, not even a dial tone. We were cut off. The scraping at the door intensified, punctuated by muffled curses. Whoever was out there was getting frustrated. I looked around frantically for something, anything we could use as a weapon. The lamp was too unwieldy, the TV bolted to the wall. My eyes landed on the shower curtain rod. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I had just managed to wrench it free when we heard a new sound, the unmistakable click of a key in the lock. Our eyes met in the dim light, a silent understanding passing between us. This was it. We had to be ready. The door swung open, and two figures stepped into the room. In the darkness, I could make out the glint of something metallic in one of their hands, a crowbar, or maybe a tire iron. Without thinking, I swung the curtain rod as hard as I could. There was a satisfying thunk as it connected with something solid, followed by a grunt of pain. Sarah screamed, more out of surprise than fear, I think, and lunged for the open door. I was right behind her, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete of the walkway as we ran. The night air was crisp and biting, a stark contrast to the stuffy warmth of our room. We sprinted across the parking lot, the gravel digging into our souls, heading for our car. Safety was just a few yards away, but as we reached the vehicle, my heart sank. The tires were flat, all four of them slashed open. We were going nowhere. "The office?" Sarah gasped, already turning towards the flickering neon sign at the far end of the lot. "Maybe the clerk can help." We ran, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind us. I chanced to glance over my shoulder and saw three men now, their faces hidden in shadow but their intent clear in the purposeful way they moved. We burst into the office, the bell over the door jingling cheerfully, incongruous with our panic. The night clerk looked up, startled, his paperback falling to the floor. "Hey, please," I panted. "You have to help us. There are men chasing us. They broke into our room." But as I spoke, I saw the clerk's expression change, not to one of concern or alarm, but to something else, something that made my blood run cold. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. Now, he said, his voice no longer bored but sharp with anticipation. "What seems to be the problem here?" The door behind us opened, the cheerful bell now sounding like a death knell. I turned to see our pursuers filing in, blocking our exit. In the harsh fluorescent light of the office, I could finally see their faces clearly. One of them, the largest, sported a fresh bruise on his temple where I'd struck him with the curtain rod. "Looks like we've got some runners, boys," the clerk said, coming out from behind the counter. He was holding something in his hand, a syringe filled with clear liquid. "You know how I hate it when they run." Sarah gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice stronger than I would have thought possible given the circumstances. The clerk chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Want? Oh, sweetheart, it's not about what we want. It's about what others are willing to pay for. And let me tell you, pretty young things like you two. You'll fetch a very nice price indeed." The reality of our situation hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a robbery. This was something far worse. We were merchandise to these men, nothing more than product to be sold to the highest bidder. I felt Sarah tense beside me, and I knew without looking what she was about to do. In that moment, we were perfectly in sync, our thoughts aligned by sheer desperation. We moved as one, charging towards the nearest man. The element of surprise was on our side, and we managed to knock him off balance. Sarah's elbow connected with his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs, while I aimed a kick at his knee. There was a sickening pop, and he went down with a howl of pain. We were through the door before the others could react, the cool night air hitting us like a slap to the face. But where could we go? Our car was useless, and we were in the middle of nowhere. "The woods," Sarah gasped, already veering towards the tree line that bordered the motel property. "We can lose them in there." I didn't argue, just followed her lead as we plunged into the darkness of the forest. Behind us, I could hear shouts and the beam of flashlights cutting through the night. They were coming after us, and they knew these woods far better than we did. We ran blindly, branches whipping at our faces and underbrush tearing at our legs. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through my system. Were they gaining on us? How long could we keep this up? Just when I thought my lungs would burst, Sarah pulled me to a stop. "Listen," she whispered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. At first, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. But then I heard it, the distant rumble of traffic, a highway, civilization, hope. We pushed on, our pace slowing to a jog as exhaustion began to take its toll. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but we couldn't be sure if that meant we'd lost them or if they were just being more cautious in their search. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we broke through the tree line. There, stretching out before us like a ribbon of salvation, was a 2-lane highway, and in the distance, I could see the headlights of an approaching truck. We waved our arms frantically, probably looking like madmen to the driver, but thankfully, mercifully, the truck began to slow. As we climbed into the cab, the kind-faced trucker peering at us with concern, I felt the first real sense of relief since this nightmare began. We were safe. We had escaped. But as the truck pulled away, carrying us towards the nearest town and the promise of help, I couldn't shake the memory of the clerk's words. How many others had fallen victim to their scheme? How long had they been operating, turning their remote motel into a hunting ground for unsuspecting travelers? I looked at Sarah, saw the same resolve in her eyes that I felt in my heart. This wasn't over. We had escaped, yes, but now we had a responsibility. To report what had happened, to make sure those men were stopped. Our road trip had taken an unexpected detour, but as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, I realized our journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The moment I handed him my keys, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. His fingers closed around them, a triumphant glint in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. But by then, it was too late. We were already driving down a road I didn't recognize, and the man I thought was just an interested buyer had become something far more sinister. It had started innocently enough. I needed to sell my old Honda Civic to help cover this semester's tuition. As a broke college student, every dollar counted, and I figured I could get a decent price for it. I posted an ad online, included some decent photos, and waited. When Mike reached out, he seemed perfect. He asked all the right questions about the car's history and maintenance. He was polite in his messages, and when we spoke on the phone, he had a friendly, easygoing manner that put me at ease. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near campus for him to see the car and maybe take it for a test drive. I remember thinking how normal he looked when I first saw him. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a polo shirt and jeans. He could have been anyone's dad or friendly neighbor. We chatted over coffee, and he seemed genuinely interested in my studies. Looking back, I should have noticed how he steered the conversation, asking about my family, where I was from, whether I had roommates, but at the time it just felt like pleasant small talk. When we got to the car, he did a thorough inspection, looking under the hood and checking the tires. Everything seemed to be going well. "Mind if we take it for a spin?" he asked, flashing a smile. "I'd like to see how it handles on the highway." I nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. It wasn't until we'd been driving for about 15 minutes that I realized we were heading out of town. Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual even as unease began to creep in. Mike's smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes changed. "I know a great stretch of road to really test the engine. Won't take long." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Actually, I'd rather we head back now. I have a class in an hour." He didn't respond, just kept driving. The buildings grew sparser, replaced by open fields and patches of woodland. My heart began to race as I realized how isolated we were becoming. "Mike, seriously, turn around, now." I tried to make my voice firm, authoritative, but it came out shaky. That's when he dropped the act. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Shut up and sit still if you know what's good for you." Fear gripped me, icy tendrils wrapping around my heart. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, did they? But the growing distance between us and civilization told me this was all too real. I glanced at the door, wondering if I could jump out. But we were going too fast, and even if I survived the fall, where would I go? There was nothing but empty fields for miles. "Don't even think about it," Mike growled, as if reading my mind. "One wrong move and things will get very unpleasant for you." I believed him. The menace in his voice left no room for doubt. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. My phone was in my pocket, but I knew I'd never be able to call for help without him noticing. Maybe if I could just send a quick text. Slowly, trying not to draw attention, I slipped my hand into my pocket, but before I could even touch my phone, Mike's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist in a vice-like grip. "Nice try," he snarled, wrenching my arm so hard I cried out in pain. "Hand it over, now." With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and placed it in his outstretched hand. He immediately rolled down the window and tossed it out, the device disappearing into the blur of the passing landscape. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I was truly cut off now, with no way to call for help. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I couldn't fall apart now. I had to stay alert, look for any opportunity to escape. We drove for what felt like hours, the scenery unchanging. Mike remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I tried to memorize every turn, every landmark, but it was useless. Everything looked the same. Finally, we turned onto a dirt road, barely more than a trail cutting through a dense patch of woods. The car bounced and jolted over the uneven ground, the branches scraping against the windows. After a few minutes, we emerged into a clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood. Mike put the car in park and turned to me, his expression unreadable. "We're here. Get out." My legs felt like jelly as I stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. In any other circumstance, it might have been peaceful. Now, it felt oppressive, isolating. "Inside," Mike ordered, prodding me forward with something hard pressed against my back. I didn't need to look to know it was a gun. The cabin was as run down inside as it looked from the outside. A layer of dust covered everything, and the musty smell of long abandonment filled my nostrils. There was a rickety table, a couple of chairs, and an old mattress in the corner. Nothing else. "Sit," Mike said, gesturing to one of the chairs. As I sank into it, he pulled out a length of rope from a duffel bag I hadn't noticed before. My stomach churned as he began to tie my hands behind my back, the rough fibers biting into my skin. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. Mike paused in his work, considering me for a moment. "It's nothing personal, kid. Just business. You'd be surprised how much people will pay for a young, healthy specimen like yourself." The implication of his words hit me like a physical blow. Human trafficking. The horror stories I'd heard on the news suddenly became my reality. I felt sick. "Please," I begged, unable to keep the desperation from my voice. "You don't have to do this. I won't tell anyone, I swear. Just let me go." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that made me flinch. "Save your breath. You're not the first to make that promise, and you won't be the last. You're merchandise now, nothing more." With my hands secured, he moved to tie my ankles to the chair legs. I knew this might be my last chance. Gathering every ounce of strength and courage I had left, I waited until he was kneeling in front of me. Then, with all my might, I kicked out, my foot connecting solidly with his face. Mike fell backward with a cry of pain and surprise. I didn't waste a second. I threw myself sideways, the chair toppling over with me. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through my shoulder, but I ignored it, focusing on wriggling my hands free. I heard Mike cursing, scrambling to his feet. The ropes were looser than I'd thought. He must have been overconfident, not expecting me to fight back. With a final, desperate tug, my hands came free. I untangled myself from the fallen chair just as Mike lunged for me. I rolled away, narrowly avoiding his grasp. My eyes darted around the cabin, looking for a weapon, an escape route, anything. There, the window. It was small, but so was I. I sprinted for it, adrenaline giving me speed I didn't know I possessed. Behind me, I heard Mike's enraged roar, felt his fingers brush my shirt as he tried to grab me, but I was faster. I threw myself at the window, arms covering my face as the glass shattered around me. Pain lanced through me as shards cut into my skin, but I didn't stop. I hit the ground running, bolting for the cover of the trees. Mike's shouts echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I ran like I'd never run before, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. But I kept going, driven by pure survival instinct. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that green maze. But eventually, the shouts faded, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest. Still, I didn't slow down. I couldn't risk it. It was nearly dark when I finally broke through the tree line and found myself on a road. A real, paved road. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I started walking, my feet aching, my body screaming for rest. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. Headlights appeared in the distance, or growing brighter as they approached. I waved my arms frantically, praying it wasn't Mike, praying they would stop. The car slowed, then pulled over. An elderly couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled appearance past the cuts and bruises. I shook my head, tears finally spilling over. "No," I choked out. "I need help, please." As they ushered me into their car, promising to take me to the police, the reality of what I'd escaped began to sink in. I was alive. I was free. But I knew the nightmare wasn't over. Mike was still out there, and who knew how many others like him. As we drove towards safety, I made a silent vow. I would do whatever it took to make sure he was caught, to make sure no one else would fall victim to his scheme. My ordeal might be over, but my fight was just beginning. The first drop of blood on the kitchen floor should have been my cue to run. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as the old man's kindly smile twisted into something far more sinister. In that moment, I realized I hadn't found shelter from the storm. I'd walked straight into the lion's den. It had started as a simple road trip, a chance to clear my head after a messy breakup. Just me and the open road. I'd been driving for hours, the rain pelting my windshield with increasing fury, when my old Chevy started making a noise that sent chills down my spine. A rattling, sputtering sound that spelled trouble. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the last town I'd passed through, when the car finally gave up the ghost. It shuddered once, twice, and then died completely, leaving me stranded on a lonely stretch of country road. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drum on the roof, weighing my options. My cell phone showed no signal, of course, and I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. With a sigh, I pulled on my raincoat and stepped out into the downpour. That's when I saw it, a faint light in the distance, barely visible through the sheets of rain. A farmhouse, set back from the road. My salvation. I slogged through the mud, my shoes squelching with every step. As I got closer, I could make out more details. The house was old, its white paint peeling in places, but it looked well maintained. Flower pots lined the porch, and warm light spilled from the windows. I hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps. It was late, past 11 p.m. according to my watch. Would they even be awake? But desperation won out over politeness, and I climbed the steps, raising my hand to knock. Before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. An elderly man stood there, his face creased with smile lines, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice as warm as his smile. "Looks like you got caught in quite a storm. Come in, come in." Relief washed over me as I stepped inside, out of the rain. The house was cozy, filled with the kind of knickknacks and worn furniture that spoke of a long, well-lived life. "I'm so sorry to bother you," I began, but he waved off my apologies. "Nonsense. We can't have you standing out there in this weather. I'm Frank, and that's my wife, Martha," he said, gesturing to an equally elderly woman who had appeared in the doorway to what I assumed was the kitchen. "I'm Alex," I replied, still dripping on their welcome mat. "My car broke down about a mile back. I was hoping I could use your phone to call for a tow." Martha clucked her tongue sympathetically. "Oh dear, that's no good. But I'm afraid our phone line's been down since this afternoon. The storm, you know." My heart sank. "Oh, I see." "Now, don't you worry," Frank said, patting my shoulder. "You're welcome to stay here tonight. The storm should pass by morning, and we can figure things out then. Martha, why don't you get our guests some dry clothes while I make some tea?" Before I knew it, I was seated at their kitchen table, wrapped in a borrowed robe that smelled faintly of mothballs, my hands curled around a steaming mug of tea. Martha fussed over me, insisting I eat something while Frank regaled me with stories of the farm's history. It was nice, comforting. For the first time since my breakup, I felt cared for. But as the night wore on, little things started to nag at me. The way Martha's smile seemed to falter when she thought I wasn't looking. The fact that Frank's eyes never quite met mine when he spoke. And there was something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't until I got up to use the bathroom that I noticed it. A faint, coppery smell underlying the homey scents of baked goods and furniture polish. I tried to shrug it off, but it clung to the back of my throat, making me uneasy. When I returned to the kitchen, Frank was alone, washing dishes at the sink. "Martha's gone to prepare the guest room for you," he said over his shoulder. I nodded, moving to pick up my mug from the table. That's when I saw it. A single drop of red on the faded linoleum floor. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Frank must have sensed my stillness. He turned, his eyes following my gaze to the floor. For a moment, Neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he put down the dish he was holding and turned to face me fully. "Ah," he said, his voice no longer warm and grandfatherly. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice that." I looked up at him, my heart beginning to race. The kindly old man was gone, replaced by someone else. Someone whose eyes were cold and calculating. "What's going on?" I asked, hating how my voice shook. Frank sighed, reaching for something behind him. "It's nothing personal, you understand. It's just, well, Martha and I, we have certain needs, and it's not often we get visitors out here." He brought his hand into view, and my blood ran cold. He was holding a large kitchen knife, its blade gleaming in the overhead light. I backed away, my eyes darting around for an escape route. "You don't have to do this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll leave right now. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Frank chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Oh, I'm afraid it's far too late for that, Alex. You see, we've already decided. You're going to help us, whether you want to or not." I made a break for it then, running for the front door. But Frank was surprisingly spry for his age. He caught me before I could reach the handle, his bony fingers digging into my arm with surprising strength. "Martha," he called out, "our guest is trying to leave." I heard footsteps on the stairs, and then Martha appeared, holding something in her hand, a syringe, I realized with growing horror. Now, she said, her voice sickly sweet. "There's no need for all this fuss, just a little prick, and you'll feel much better." I fought then, with everything I had. I kicked and scratched and screamed, but they were stronger than they looked. Frank held me down while Martha approached with the syringe. In my desperation, I lashed out blindly. My elbow connected with something soft. Martha's stomach, I realized, and she stumbled back with a cry of pain. The syringe clattered to the floor. Taking advantage of Frank's momentary distraction, I wrenched myself free. I ran for the kitchen, my mind racing. The back door. There had to be a back door. I found it, fumbling with the lock as I heard Frank's angry shouts behind me. The door finally gave way, and I burst out into the rain-soaked night. The yard was muddy, my bare feet slipping and sliding as I ran. I could hear them behind me, their voices carried on the wind. I headed for the barn, thinking I could hide there, maybe find a weapon. The barn door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the quiet night. Inside, it was pitch black. I felt my way forward, my hands outstretched, praying I wouldn't run into anything. Suddenly, my foot hit something solid. I went down hard, landing in something wet and sticky. The coppery smell from earlier hit me full force, and I had to choke back a scream as I realized what it was. Blood. So much blood. My eyes were adjusting to the darkness now, and I could make out shapes. Hanging hooks, tables with straps, and something else. Something that looked horribly like body parts. This wasn't just murder. This was butchery. I scrambled to my feet, bile rising in my throat. I had to get out of here. Had to run. Had to find help. But as I turned to leave, I found the doorway blocked. Frank and Martha stood there, silhouetted against the night sky. "Oh, Alex," Martha said, her voice filled with false sympathy. "You really shouldn't have come in here. Now we have no choice." I backed away, my eyes darting around for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My hand closed around something cold and metal, a pitchfork leaning against the wall. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing it in front of me. Frank laughed, a chilling sound. "Or what? You'll kill us. Go ahead. It won't be the first time someone's tried." They advanced slowly, confidently. They knew they had me cornered, but they had underestimated my will to survive. As they got closer, I made my move. I charged forward, the pitchfork held out in front of me like a lance. Frank's eyes widened in surprise, but it was too late. The tines sank into his chest with a sickening thud. Martha screamed, a sound of pure rage and grief. She came at me with her bare hands, her nails raking across my face. We grappled, rolling on the blood-soaked floor of the barn. My hand closed around something hard, a hammer that had fallen from a workbench. I swung blindly, feeling it connect with a dull thud. Martha went limp. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, the reality of what had just happened washing over me. Then, slowly, I got to my feet. The rain had stopped, I realized, and in the distance, I could hear a sound that made my heart leap. Sirens. As I stumbled out of the barn, I saw police cars pulling up to the farmhouse, their lights painting the night in red and blue. Someone must have heard the commotion, called for help. I sank to my knees in the muddy yard, relief and shock washing over me in equal measure. It was over. I was safe. But as the police swarmed around me, asking questions I couldn't begin to answer, I knew that the nightmare was far from over. The things I'd seen in that barn, the horrors I'd experienced, they would stay with me forever. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? The safe wasn't supposed to be open. That was my first clue that this seemingly cushy house-sitting gig was about to turn into a nightmare. As I stared at the stack of unmarked bills and the suspicious-looking ledger, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the front door lock. In that moment, I knew I was in way over my head. It had all started innocently enough. I was a broke college student, desperate for some extra cash to cover my textbooks and maybe splurge on something other than ramen noodles for once. When my professor, Dr. Winters, I mentioned he and his wife needed someone to house-sit for a week while they were at a conference, I jumped at the chance. The Winters lived in one of those big, fancy houses in the suburbs, the kind with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. It was a far cry from my cramped studio apartment. When I arrived, Mrs. Winters gave me a whirlwind tour, pointing out the plants that needed watering and the elaborate security system I needed to set each night. "Oh, and dear," she'd said, pausing at the door to the study, "this room is strictly off limits. Private papers and all that. I'm sure you understand." I'd nodded, not thinking much of it. Rich people and their secrets, right? The first few days were uneventful. I lounged by the pool, raided their well-stocked fridge, and binge-watched shows on their massive TV. It was like a vacation in paradise. But on the 4th day, curiosity got the better of me. I'd always been a bit nosy. It's what made me want to be a journalist in the first place. The locked study door had been nagging at me, and I couldn't resist taking a peek. I told myself I was just making sure everything was okay in there. Maybe there was a plant I'd forgotten to water. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was enough to convince me to try the door handle. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. The study was immaculate, all dark wood and leather-bound books. It looked like something out of a movie, but what caught my eye was the painting on the far wall. It was slightly askew, and behind it, I could see the edge of a safe. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but like I said, curiosity has always been my weakness. I approached the painting, my heart pounding. I told myself I was just going to look, not touch anything. But when I moved the painting aside, I froze. The safe was open, just a crack, but enough for me to see inside. That's when I heard the front door. Panic set in. I quickly closed the safe and straightened the painting, my hands shaking. Footsteps echoed through the house, getting closer. "Hello?" a male voice called out. It wasn't Dr. Winters. I looked around frantically, searching for a place to hide. The closet was too obvious, and I'd never make it out the window in time. In desperation, I dove under the massive oak desk, pulling the chair in close to conceal me. The study door opened, and a pair of expensive-looking shoes came into view. "All clear in here," the man said, presumably into a phone. "Yeah, safe's untouched. Looks like the kid didn't snoop after all." Kid? Were they talking about me? Another set of footsteps entered the room. "Good," a woman's voice replied. "Last thing we need is some nosy college brat messing up our operation." My blood ran cold. Operation. What had I stumbled into? "Let's get what we need and get out," the man said. "The Winters will be back tomorrow, and we need to have everything in place by then." I held my breath as they moved around the room. I heard the safe open, papers rustling, and the distinct sound of money being counted. "Perfect," the woman said. "With this last shipment, we'll have enough to expand into 3 more states. The boss will be pleased." Shipment. States. My mind was reeling. This sounded big, way bigger than some run-of-the-mill theft or fraud. "What about the girl?" the man asked. "Think she suspects anything?" There was a pause. "Doubtful," the woman finally replied. "From what the Winters said, she's just some naive student. Probably spent the whole week by the pool." If only they knew. They continued to talk, mentioning names and places I didn't recognize. I tried to memorize as much as I could, my journalistic instincts kicking in despite my fear. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they finally left the study. I waited, barely breathing, until I heard the front door close and a car engine start up outside. Slowly, I crawled out from under the desk, my legs cramped and shaky. My mind was racing. What should I do? Call the police? But what if the Winters were involved? They could be back any minute, and I had no proof of what I'd heard. I needed evidence. With trembling hands, I approached the safe again. It was still slightly open. Inside, I found stacks of cash, the ledger I'd seen earlier, and a USB drive. Without thinking too much about the consequences, I grabbed the USB drive and shoved it in my pocket. I also snapped a quick photo of the open safe with my phone, making sure to capture the cash and ledger. Just as I was closing the safe and straightening the painting, I heard another car pull up outside. Panic gripped me again. I raced out of the study, barely remembering to close the door behind me. I made it to the living room just as the front door opened. Dr. and Mrs. Winters walked in, looking tired but happy. "Oh, Emma," Mrs. Winters exclaimed. "We didn't expect you to still be here. How was everything?" I forced a smile, hoping my face didn't betray the turmoil inside me. "Great," I managed to say. "No problems at all. How was your conference?" As they chatted about their trip, I nodded along, my mind elsewhere. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. "Well, we won't keep you," Dr. Winters said finally. "I'm sure you're eager to get back to your own place. Here's a little something extra for your trouble." He handed me an envelope. I thanked him, feeling sick to my stomach. Was this hush money? Did they know I'd overheard something? I gathered my things and headed for the door, my legs feeling like jelly. "Oh, and Emma," Mrs. Winters called after me. "We might need a house sitter again next month. Would you be interested?" I turned, meeting her gaze. Her smile seemed genuine, but there was something in her eyes, a calculating look that I hadn't noticed before. "Sure," I heard myself say. "Just let me know." As I drove home, my mind was in chaos. What had I gotten myself into? I had evidence of something. But what exactly? And what was I supposed to do with it? I thought about going to the police, but without knowing who was involved, it felt too risky. What if the corruption went higher than I could imagine? When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door and drew the curtains. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I powered up my laptop with shaking hands and inserted the USB drive. What I found made my blood run cold. Financial records, shipping manifests, names and addresses. It was all there. This wasn't just some small-time operation. This was organized crime on a massive scale. And my professors, the kindly Dr. and Mrs. Winters, were right in the middle of it. I stayed up all night, poring over the files, taking notes, trying to make sense of it all. By morning, I had a decision to make. I could turn over what I knew to the authorities and hope for the best. I could pretend I'd never seen anything and try to forget it all. Or I could dig deeper, use my journalistic skills to uncover the whole story. As the sun rose, casting a pale light through my curtains, I made my choice. I couldn't walk away from this. It was too big, too important. I opened my laptop and began to type. The suburbs hide dark secrets behind their perfectly manicured lawns and friendly smiles. But sometimes, all it takes is one curious house sitter to bring those secrets into the light. I didn't know where this story would lead me, or how dangerous it might become, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. The cushy house-sitting gig had turned into the biggest story of my life, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The moment her hand touched my arm, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Her fingers were ice cold, her grip unnaturally strong. As I looked into her eyes, pleading for help, I saw nothing but emptiness. And that's when I realized this wasn't a stranded motorist. This was a trap. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the rural highway broken only by the occasional flicker of my headlights, catching a road sign or the eyes of some nocturnal creature. It was past midnight, and I was on my last delivery run of the night. As a driver for a small courier company, these late-night routes were part of the job. Usually, they were uneventful. Boring, even. But not tonight. I first saw her about a mile back, a lone figure on the side of the road, arm outstretched in the universal sign for a hitchhiker. At first, I drove past. Company policy strictly forbade picking up strangers. But something made me slow down, glancing in my rearview mirror. She looked so vulnerable standing there in the dark. Young, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair whipping around her face in the wind. I could see she was shivering, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Against my better judgment, I found myself pulling over. As I put the van in park and rolled down the passenger window, I called out, "You okay? Need some help?" She approached slowly, relief evident on her face. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice trembling. "My car broke down a few miles back, and I've been walking for hours. Could you please give me a ride to the next town?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to drive away, but it was cold out, and the next town was at least 20 miles away. What kind of person would I be if I left her here? "All right," I said, unlocking the doors. "Hop in. I can take you as far as Millbrook." Her smile was grateful as she climbed into the passenger seat. "Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver." We drove in silence for a few minutes. I could feel her shivering next to me, so I turned up the heat. "I'm Jake, by the way," I said, trying to break the ice. "Sarah," she replied, offering a small smile. As we talked, I found myself relaxing. Sarah was easy to chat with, and I felt good about helping her out. But as we drove deeper into the night, things started to feel off. I noticed Sarah kept glancing in the side mirror, as if looking for something behind us. And when I asked about her broken-down car, her story seemed to change slightly with each telling. "So, what kind of car do you drive?" I asked casually, trying to pin down the details. Sarah hesitated a beat too long before answering. "Oh, it's a blue sedan. Nothing special." But I distinctly remembered her saying it was red earlier. My unease grew as I realized we were now in the most isolated stretch of the route. Nothing but dense forest on either side of the road for miles. That's when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. A car approaching fast from behind. Sarah saw it too. Her entire demeanor changed in an instant. Gone was the grateful, shivering girl. In her place sat someone else entirely. Cold, calculating, dangerous. "Pull over," she commanded, her voice hard. "What? Why?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "Just do it," she snapped, reaching into her jacket. The glint of metal caught my eye. A gun. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a setup. I slowed the van, my mind racing. If I stopped, I was dead. But if I tried to run, in that split second of indecision, Sarah made the choice for me. She grabbed the wheel, jerking it hard to the right. The van swerved violently. I fought for control, but the tires caught the soft shoulder of the road. We were going too fast. The world spun as the van rolled once, twice, before coming to rest on its side in the ditch. For a moment, everything was silent except for the hiss of the radiator and the ringing in my ears. Then, pain hit me in waves. My head throbbed where it had struck the window, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my face. I blinked, trying to orient myself. Sarah was gone, the passenger door hanging open above me. Outside, I could hear voices, male voices. "Check the van," someone shouted. "Make sure he's alive. Boss wants him breathing." Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I unbuckled my seatbelt, falling awkwardly onto the driver's side door. Every movement sent shards of pain through my body, but I forced myself to move. The back of the van was a mess, packages strewn everywhere. But among the chaos, I spotted my salvation, a small pry bar we used for stubborn crates. I grabbed it just as a face appeared in the shattered windshield, a man, mid-30s, with a scar running down his cheek. His eyes widened when he saw me conscious. "He's awake!" he yelled to someone behind him. "Get over here!" I didn't give him a chance to say more. With all my strength, I swung the pry bar. It connected with a sickening crunch, and the man fell back with a cry of pain. Using the bar, I managed to force open the driver's side door enough to squeeze through. As I emerged from the wreckage, I got my first clear look at my attackers. There were 4 of them, including Sarah, all armed, all looking at me with a mixture of surprise and anger. "Don't move," one of them growled, raising his gun. But I was already running, fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror. I plunged into the forest, branches whipping my face as I crashed through the underbrush. Behind me, I could hear them shouting, their voices getting fainter as I put distance between us. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Only then did I allow myself to stop, collapsing behind a fallen tree. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of pursuit. Nothing but the normal sounds of the forest at night. As my breathing slowed, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was lost in the woods, injured, with no phone and no idea which direction led to safety. And somewhere out there, 4 armed individuals were hunting me. I allowed myself a moment of despair, but only a moment. I couldn't give up. I had to keep moving. Using the stars to orient myself, I began to walk. Every shadow made me jump. Every snapping twig sent my heart racing. But I pressed on. Hours passed. The sky began to lighten, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. And then, like a miracle, I heard it. The distant sound of traffic. New energy flooded through me. I quickened my pace, following the sound. Finally, the trees thinned, and I found myself on the edge of a highway. A different highway than the one I'd been on, but a path to salvation nonetheless. I flagged down the first car I saw, probably looking like a madman with my bloodied face and torn clothes. The elderly couple inside seemed terrified, but they stopped. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. Someone's after me." They must have seen the desperation in my eyes because the man nodded, unlocking the doors. "Get in, son. We'll take you to the police." As we drove, I recounted my harrowing night. The couple listened in shocked silence, the woman clutching her husband's arm. At the police station, my story was met with skepticism at first, but as I described Sarah and the others in detail, I saw recognition dawn in the detective's eyes. "We've had reports of a group operating like this along I-80, he said, his expression grim, "targeting lone drivers, especially truckers and delivery personnel. But this is the first time someone's escaped to tell us about it." Over the next few weeks, I worked with the police in giving statements, looking at mugshots. They found my van, but Sarah and her accomplices had vanished. I couldn't go back to my old job. The thought of driving those lonely roads at night filled me with paralyzing fear. But in a way, Sarah and her crew had given me a gift, a story, a warning. I started writing, sharing my experience online. It resonated with people, especially other drivers. Soon I was giving talks, advocating for better safety measures for long-haul drivers and couriers. My brush with death had given me a new purpose, and while I still look over my shoulder more often than I'd like, I know that by speaking out, I might just save someone else from falling into the same trap. Because out there on the dark highways, not everyone who asks for help is a victim. Sometimes, the real danger is in being too willing to trust a stranger. The first footprint I saw could have been my own. The second, maybe a fellow hiker's. But the third, perfectly formed and definitely not mine, sent a chill down my spine. Someone was following me, and in the vast wilderness of the Rockies, that could only mean one thing. I was being hunted. I'd always loved solo camping. There's something about the solitude, the raw connection with nature that you just can't get when you're with other people. This trip was supposed to be my escape. A week-long trek through some of the most beautiful and isolated terrain in Colorado. I'd planned meticulously, packing enough supplies to last me 10 days, just in case. A satellite phone was my only concession to safety, and even that I'd promised myself I'd use only in the direst emergency. The first 3 days were everything I'd hoped for. The weather was perfect, crisp mountain air filling my lungs as I hiked through alpine meadows and dense forests. At night, I'd fall asleep to the sound of a nearby stream, the Milky Way stretching overhead in a dazzling display you never see in the city. It was on the fourth morning that things changed. I woke just before dawn, as usual, eager to break camp and get an early start. That's when I saw it, a set of footprints in the soft earth near my tent. At first, I dismissed them. I must have made them last night and forgotten, I told myself. But as I followed their trail with my eyes, my blood ran cold. They circled my entire campsite, coming right up to my tent at one point. Someone had been watching me sleep. I packed up faster than I ever had before, my hands shaking as I stuffed my gear into my backpack. Part of me wanted to use the satellite phone right then to call for help. But what would I say? That I saw some footprints. I had no proof of any real danger, and the rational part of my brain was still trying to come up with logical explanations. So I hiked on, following my planned route but with a new sense of urgency. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. By midday, I was exhausted, more from the constant state of alertness than from the physical exertion. I stopped by a small lake to refill my water bottles and try to calm my nerves. That's when I saw the reflection in the water, a figure standing on the ridge above me, partially hidden by a tree. I whirled around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Had I imagined it? The stress playing tricks on my mind? I didn't stay to find out. I grabbed my pack and started moving again, no longer caring about following my planned route. My only goal now was to put as much distance between me and whoever or whatever was out there. As the day wore on, the evidence became harder to dismiss. A freshly broken branch here, a disturbed patch of moss there. Small signs that someone was paralleling my route, staying just out of sight. By the time I made camp that night, I was a wreck. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. I didn't dare light a fire, instead choking down a cold meal of trail mix and beef jerky. Sleep was out of the question. I sat with my back against a tree, a small folding knife clutched in my hand, straining my eyes against the darkness. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving around my campsite. I held my breath, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from all around me. Then, a voice, low and gravelly. "I know you're awake. Why don't you come out and say hello?" Terror gripped me. This was real. This was happening. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer out. "What do you want?" A chuckle, cold and mirthless. "What do I want?" "Oh, city boy, out here, it's not about want. It's about need. And right now, I need you to start running." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted, leaving my tent and most of my gear behind. The only things I had were what I'd been clutching all night: my knife, the satellite phone, and a small pack with some water and energy bars. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear him, not running, but moving steadily, confidently. He knew these woods. This was his territory, and I was nothing but prey. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I allowed myself to slow down, gasping for breath. I couldn't keep running forever. I needed a plan. The satellite phone. I pulled it out with trembling hands, praying for a signal. 1 bar. It would have to do. As I was dialing, a sharp crack split the air. The phone exploded in my hand, pieces of plastic and electronics scattering on the forest floor. The shot had come from behind me, too close for comfort. The voice called out, closer now. That would be cheating. This is between you and me, city boy. I ran again, fueled by a new surge of adrenaline. But I knew I couldn't outrun him forever. I needed to outsmart him. I found a stream and started following it downstream, hoping the water would mask my scent and cover my tracks. As I moved, my mind raced, trying to recall every survival tip I'd ever read or seen on TV. After about a mile, I veered off suddenly, backtracking along the bank before heading off in a new direction. It wasn't much, but I hoped it might buy me some time, make him think I was still following the stream. I found a dense thicket and crawled inside, trying to slow my breathing, to become as silent and still as possible. And I waited. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold fear that gripped me. I heard him pass by twice, muttering to himself, clearly frustrated at having lost my trail. As dusk approached, I knew I had to move. I couldn't stay hidden forever, and I was no closer to safety than I had been this morning. Slowly, carefully, I emerged from my hiding spot. That's when I saw it. A glint of metal in the fading light. A trap, not 10 feet from where I'd been hiding. If I'd tried to run earlier, I would have stumbled right into it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just tracking me. He was herding me, driving me towards his traps. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment hunt. This was a game he'd played before. With this new understanding came a grim determination. I wasn't going to be his prey any longer. It was time to turn the tables. I started moving again, but with purpose now. I laid false trails, doubled back on myself, used every trick I could think of to confuse my trail. And all the while, I watched for more traps, for signs of his passage. As night fell, I found what I was looking for, his camp. It was well hidden, but in his arrogance, he'd underestimated me. He hadn't expected his prey to become the hunter. I watched from the shadows as he returned, clearly angry at having lost me. He threw down his rifle and slumped by the fire, muttering curses. This was my chance. I crept closer, my hand tightening around my small knife. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. A twig snapped under my foot. His head whipped around, eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, we just stared at each other, prey and predator. Roles suddenly reversed. Then, everything happened at once. He lunged for his rifle. I threw myself forward, knife outstretched. We collided, rolling on the ground, each fighting for survival. He was stronger, but I was desperate. Somehow, in the chaos, my knife found its mark. He let out a gasp, more of surprise than pain, and then went still. I scrambled away, shocked at what I'd done. But there was no time for regret or moral quandaries. I grabbed his rifle and satellite phone, and I ran. It took search and rescue 2 days to find me. By then, I was dehydrated, exhausted, and on the verge of collapse. As the helicopter lifted me to safety, I looked down at the vast wilderness below. It no longer seemed beautiful. Now, it just looked like a place to hide bodies. The authorities found his camp, and with it, evidence of other victims. The man who had hunted me was wanted in 3 states for a string of disappearances. In the end, my nightmare had saved lives. The moment I saw my reflection blink, I knew something was terribly wrong. I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, my heart pounding as I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone had been watching me, and they were much closer than I ever could have imagined. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. After months of grueling work and a nasty breakup, I decided to treat myself to a week-long stay at a secluded cabin in the woods. The listing had promised peace, quiet, and all the modern amenities a city girl like me could want. It seemed perfect. When I arrived, I was immediately charmed. The cabin was rustic but beautifully maintained, with a cozy living room, a fully equipped kitchen, and a bedroom that looked out over a serene lake. The owner, a friendly older woman named Margaret, gave me a quick tour before handing over the keys. "Now, don't you worry about a thing," she'd said with a warm smile. "You've got the whole place to yourself. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. It's just you and nature out here." If only I'd known how wrong she was. The first couple of days were blissful. I spent my time hiking the nearby trails, reading on the porch, and generally decompressing from the stress of city life. By the 3rd day, I felt more relaxed than I had in years. That evening, I decided to treat myself to a long, hot bath. As I soaked in the clawfoot tub, letting the lavender-scented bubbles ease away the last of my tension, I noticed something odd about the mirror hanging on the opposite wall. There was a small, dark spot in the corner, barely noticeable unless you were really looking. Curiosity piqued. I got out of the tub and wrapped myself in a towel. As I approached the mirror, my wet feet leaving damp prints on the wooden floor, I realized what I was looking at. It was a camera lens, expertly hidden within the mirror's ornate frame. My blood ran cold. Someone had been watching me. How long had it been there? How many other guests had been unknowingly recorded in their most private moments? With shaking hands, I began to search the rest of the bathroom. Now that I knew what to look for, I found 2 more hidden cameras, one in the light fixture, another disguised as a coat hook. Panic rising in my throat, I moved to the bedroom. More cameras. The living room, the kitchen, even on the porch. They were everywhere. I felt violated, exposed, and utterly terrified. Who was watching? What did they want? I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police in, but there was no signal. Of course, I was miles from the nearest cell tower. That's when I heard it. A soft creak from somewhere in the house. I froze, straining my ears. Another creak, closer this time. Footsteps. Someone was inside. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy brass candlestick on the mantel. I grabbed it, its weight reassuring in my hands. The footsteps were in the hallway now, approaching the living room where I stood. I raised the candlestick, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard. A figure appeared in the doorway. A man, tall and lean, with a face I recognized instantly. It was Margaret, the owner. Or rather, it was Margaret without her wig and makeup. "Well, well," he said, his voice no longer the warm, motherly tone I remembered. "Looks like my little mouse has figured out the game." I tightened my grip on the candlestick. "Who are you? What do you want?" He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Who I am doesn't matter. As for what I want, well, let's just say you're not the first guest to provide me with some quality entertainment." The implication of his words made me feel sick. "The cameras, how long have they been here?" "Oh, years now," he said, taking a step closer. I backed away, keeping the coffee table between us. You'd be amazed how much people will pay for the right kind of footage. And you, my dear, have been quite the star performer. I felt a surge of rage cut through my fear. You sick bastard, I'm calling the police. He laughed again, pulling something from his pocket. My cell phone. I'm afraid that won't be possible. You really should be more careful with your belongings. I glanced at the door, wondering if I could make a run for it, but he was blocking the only exit, and I knew he'd be on me in seconds if I tried. Now, he said, his tone becoming businesslike, we have two options here. One, you can try to fight, to run. I promise you, it won't end well. Or two, you can be a good girl and do exactly as I say. Who knows? You might even enjoy your new career. The thought of submitting to this monster made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to appear defeated, my shoulders slumping as I lowered the candlestick. That's better, he said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. He took another step closer. I knew you'd see reason. That's when I made my move. As he reached for me, I swung the candlestick with all my might. It connected with his head with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the floor. I didn't wait to see if he was out cold. I ran, snatching my phone from where it had fallen. I burst out of the cabin and into the cool night air, my bare feet slapping against the dirt path as I sprinted towards the main road. I could hear him behind me, shouting threats and obscenities, but fear gave me speed I didn't know I possessed. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Finally, blessedly, I saw headlights in the distance. I saw a car approaching on the main road. I waved my arms frantically, praying they'd stop. The car slowed, then pulled over. An elderly couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Please," I gasped. "You have to help me. There's a man. He's after me." They didn't ask questions. The woman opened the back door, and I scrambled in. As we drove away, I saw a figure emerge from the woods in the rearview mirror. Even from a distance, I could feel his rage. At the police station, my story was met with initial skepticism, but when they raided the cabin, they found not only the cameras but hard drives full of footage of me and of countless other victims. The man, whose real name turned out to be Gerald Simmons, was arrested. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation that had been running for years. He'd been selling the videos on the dark web, catering to voyeurs with deep pockets. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The violation, the fear, the knowledge that intimate moments of my life were out there, potentially seen by who knows how many people. But as I worked with a therapist and connected with other survivors, I found my voice. I started speaking out, advocating for stricter regulations on vacation rentals and raising awareness about hidden cameras. It's been a year now, and I'd be lying if I said I was completely over it. I still check for cameras everywhere I go. I still have nightmares about being watched, but I'm healing, slowly but surely. And every time I share my story, every time I see the recognition and gratitude in someone's eyes, I know that something good has come out of my nightmare, because now when I look in the mirror, I don't see a victim. I see a survivor, a fighter, and a protector. The cabin in the woods took something from me, yes, but it also gave me a purpose. And in the end, that's worth more than any peaceful getaway ever could be. The first gunshot shattered the silence of the night, and with it, my illusion of safety. In that instant, I realized that this wasn't just a routine break-in. This was something far more dangerous, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I'd been working as a night security guard at the Millbrook Industrial Complex for just over 3 months. It was an easy gig, or so I thought. The complex was massive, a sprawling maze of warehouses and office buildings on the outskirts of town. But at night, it was a ghost town. My job was simple: make my rounds, check the locks, and keep an eye on the security cameras. That night started like any other. I arrived for my shift at 10 p.m., relieving Dave, the evening guard. We went through our usual handover routine, nothing out of the ordinary to report. Quiet as a graveyard out there, Dave had said with a chuckle as he left. Try not to fall asleep, Jake. If only he knew how wrong he was. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed something was off. I was in the main security office, eyes glazing over as I stared at the bank of monitors showing feeds from cameras all over the complex. Something moved on one of the screens, a flicker of shadow that didn't belong. I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. There it was again, on a different camera, a figure darting between buildings. My heart rate picked up. This wasn't some teenager looking for a thrill or a homeless person seeking shelter. The way they moved, quick and purposeful, spoke of something more sinister. I reached for the phone, ready to call the police, when the alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed across the monitors as multiple security breaches were detected simultaneously. This was coordinated, professional. I was reaching for my radio to alert the off-site security team when the first gunshot rang out. The sound echoed through the empty complex, and I saw muzzle flashes on one of the cameras. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a break-in, this was an armed assault. I knew I should stay put, lock the door, and wait for the police. That's what we were trained to do. But something inside me couldn't just sit there. I had to know what they were after. Had to try and stop them if I could. Grabbing my flashlight and keycard, I slipped out of the security office. The complex was eerily quiet now, the alarms having shut off automatically after 60 seconds to avoid drawing too much attention. In the distance, I could hear muffled voices and the sound of breaking glass. I moved carefully through the maze of corridors, my shoes squeaking on the polished floors. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the tense silence. As I rounded a corner, I saw them. 3 men, dressed in black, wearing ski masks. They were trying to break into one of the high-security labs, the kind that even I didn't have access to. I ducked back behind the corner, my heart pounding. What the hell was I doing? I was a rent-a-cop with a flashlight, up against armed intruders. This was insane. But I couldn't just walk away. Whatever was in that lab, it was important enough for these guys to risk an armed robbery. I had to do something. I looked around, desperate for anything I could use as a weapon or a distraction. My eyes landed on the fire alarm on the wall. It was a risk. The noise would alert the intruders to my presence, but it might also scare them off. Taking a deep breath, I smashed the glass and pulled the lever. The effect was instantaneous. Sirens blared and sprinklers activated, drenching everything in seconds. I heard shouts of surprise and anger from around the corner. Using the chaos as cover, I peered around the edge. The men were no longer at the lab door. They were running, heading towards the exit. Relief flooded through me. It had worked. They were leaving. But then one of them stopped, turning back. Even through the ski mask, I could see his eyes narrow as they landed on me. "Hey!" he shouted, raising his gun. I didn't think. I ran. Bullets whizzed past me as I sprinted down the corridor, zigzagging to make myself a harder target. I could hear their footsteps behind me, gaining ground. I knew the layout of the complex better than they did. It was my only advantage. I took a sharp left, then a right, leading them deeper into the maze of hallways. My lungs burned as I ran, fear and adrenaline pushing me faster than I'd ever moved. I needed a place to hide, somewhere I could lose them. The basement. The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. The basement level was a warren of storage rooms and maintenance tunnels. If I could make it there, I might have a chance. I changed direction, heading for the nearest stairwell. The sound of pursuit was closer now, their shouts echoing off the walls. I burst through the stairwell door and practically flew down the steps, taking them 3 at a time. Behind me, I heard the door slam open again. They were right on my heels. The basement level was dark, emergency lights casting long shadows. I ran down the main corridor, my wet shoes slipping on the concrete floor. Left, right, another left. I turned corners at random, hoping to lose them in the maze. My chest felt like it was going to explode, but I didn't dare slow down. Finally, I spotted what I was looking for. A small maintenance closet, tucked away in a corner. I yanked the door open and squeezed inside, pulling it shut behind me. The closet was tiny, barely big enough for me to stand in. It smelled of cleaning products and damp. I held my breath, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. Footsteps approached, slowing as they neared my hiding spot. I could hear them breathing heavily just on the other side of the thin door. "Where'd he go?" one of them growled. "Check every door," another replied. "He's got to be here somewhere." I closed my eyes, willing myself to become invisible. My hand tightened around my flashlight, ready to use it as a weapon if necessary. The doorknob rattled. I tensed, preparing for the worst. But then, a sound that made my heart soar. Police sirens, growing louder by the second. "Shit!" one of the men exclaimed. "We've got to go, now." I heard them run off, their footsteps fading into the distance. Still, I didn't move. I stayed in that closet, shaking with adrenaline and relief, until I heard the unmistakable sound of police radios and multiple footsteps. When I finally emerged, I was greeted by a team of very surprised police officers. The story spilled out of me in a rush. The break-in, the chase, everything. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the complex, I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. The police had caught 2 of the 3 intruders as they tried to escape. The third was still at large. Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, approached me with a grim expression. "You took one hell of a risk tonight, Jake," she said, her tone a mix of admiration and exasperation. "But thanks to you, we managed to stop a major theft. That lab they were trying to break into, it contains prototype technology worth millions." I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Who were they?" I asked. Detective Chen sighed. "Professional thieves, working for a rival company. We've been tracking their operation for months, but we never expected them to be this bold." She paused, fixing me with a serious look. "You know, the department could use someone with your quick thinking and bravery. Ever considered a career in law enforcement?" I couldn't help but laugh. 12 hours ago, I was a bored security guard counting the minutes until my shift ended. Now I was being recruited by the police. As I watched the sun rise over the industrial complex, casting a golden glow over the scene of my night-long ordeal, I realized something. Life can change in an instant. One moment, you're going through the motions, and the next, you're running for your life, making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. I didn't know if I'd take Detective Chen up on her offer, but I did know one thing. I'd never look at my boring security job the same way again, because sometimes the most ordinary nights can turn into the most extraordinary adventures. And sometimes, the person you least expect to be a hero, even yourself, can rise to the occasion when it matters most. The moment the door slammed shut behind me, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The sound echoed through the empty house, a finality to it that sent chills down my spine. I was trapped, and the family-friendly facade of my clients had just crumbled away, revealing something far more sinister. It was supposed to be a routine showing. As a real estate agent in the upscale neighborhood of Oakwood Hills, I'd done hundreds of these. The Jensen property was a gem, a sprawling 6-bedroom mansion with all the bells and whistles the wealthy clients in this area desired. Pool, home theater, wine cellar, you name it. This place had it. When the Carters contacted me about viewing the property, I was thrilled. They seemed like the perfect buyers, a successful businessman, his elegant wife, and their 2 well-behaved children. They had the means and the motivation to make a quick sale. I remember thinking how lucky I was as I pulled up to the Jensen house that sunny Saturday afternoon. The Carters were already waiting, looking picture-perfect in their country club attire. "Mrs. Reeves," Mr. Carter greeted me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for meeting us on such short notice. Please, call me Sarah," I replied with my best sales smile. "Shall we begin the tour?" As we moved through the house, I pointed out all its features. from the gourmet kitchen to the luxurious master suite. The Carters seemed impressed, asking all the right questions. Mrs. Carter was particularly interested in the security system, which I assured her was top of the line. It wasn't until we reached the basement that things started to feel off. Mr. Carter's questions became more pointed, focused on the layout and any potential hidden spaces. "You never know when you might need a panic room," he joked, but there was an edge to his voice that made me uneasy. As we climbed the stairs back to the main floor, I felt Mrs. Carter's hand on my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Sarah, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "would you mind if we took another look at the master bedroom? I have a few more questions about the closet space." I nodded, leading the way back upstairs. Mr. Carter and the children stayed in the living room, engrossed in what looked like a heated discussion. The master bedroom was at the end of a long hallway. As we entered, I launched into my usual spiel about the custom cabinetry and designer fixtures, but Mrs. Carter wasn't listening. She was staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You know, Sarah," she said, taking a step closer, "we're not really here to buy a house." My heart skipped a beat. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." Her smile widened, revealing too many teeth. "Oh, I think you do. Or at least you will." That's when I felt a sharp pain in my neck. I spun around to see Mr. Carter standing behind me, an empty syringe in his hand. When had he come upstairs? What did you do to me?" I slurred, my vision already starting to blur. "Don't worry, dear," Mrs. Carter cooed. "Everything will make sense soon." The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of their laughter, cold and cruel. When I came to, I was in a dimly lit room I didn't recognize. My head was pounding, and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with growing horror that I was in some sort of cell. The walls were concrete, and a heavy metal door was the only exit. Panic set in as the memories came flooding back. The Carters, the house showing, the injection. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. I tried to stand, Mom, but my legs were wobbly, and I stumbled. That's when I noticed the chain. A thick metal shackle was fastened around my ankle, connected to a bolt in the floor. I was well and truly trapped. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time lost all meaning in that windowless room. I alternated between frantic attempts to escape and periods of despair where I huddled in the corner, sobbing. Finally, the door opened. Mr. Carter walked in, looking as polished as ever in his expensive suit. "Ah, good. You're awake," he said, as if we were meeting for a business lunch. "I hope you're finding your accommodations adequate." "Why are you doing this?" I croaked, my voice hoarse from screaming. He chuckled. "Why does anyone do anything, Sarah? For profit, of course. You see, there are people out there willing to pay a great deal of money for someone like you. Young, attractive, educated. You'll fetch a high price on the right market." The implication of his words hit me like a physical blow. Human trafficking. The horror stories I'd heard on the news suddenly became my reality. "You won't get away with this," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "People will look for me. The police." "The police," he laughed. "My dear, we've been doing this for years. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, you'll be long gone. Just another real estate agent who skipped town with her clients' deposits. It's a surprisingly common occurrence, you know." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Try to get some rest. We have a long journey ahead of us tomorrow." As the door slammed shut, I felt something inside me break. This was really happening. I was going to be sold like cattle, shipped off to God knows where, never to be seen again. But as the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Anger, determination. I refused to be a victim. I had to find a way out. I examined every inch of my cell, looking for weaknesses, The chain was solid, the walls impenetrable, but the door, the hinges looked old, rusty. If I could somehow reach them, I tore a strip of fabric from my blouse and began to braid it, making it as strong as possible. Then, I started working on the bolt in the floor. It was secure, but the concrete around it was crumbling. If I could loosen it just enough. Hours passed as I worked, my fingers bloody and raw. But finally, I felt the bolt give way. I was free of the chain. Using my makeshift rope, I managed to reach the door hinges. They were as weak as I'd hoped. With enough pressure, they began to creak and bend. Just as I heard the satisfying snap of the last hinge giving way, footsteps echoed down the hall. They were coming. I pressed myself against the wall next to the door, my heart pounding. This was my only chance. The door swung open, and Mrs. Carter stepped in. "Time to go, dear. You're new." I didn't let her finish. I slammed into her with all my might, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, hitting her head on the concrete wall with a sickening thud. I didn't wait to see if she was okay. I ran. The hallway seemed endless, doors on either side. I could hear shouts behind me, heavy footsteps giving chase. I turned a corner and saw it, a window. Without hesitation, I threw myself at it. The glass shattered, and I felt a searing pain as shards cut into my skin. But I didn't stop. I tumbled out onto soft grass, the cool night air hitting my face. I was in a backyard, high fences on all sides. But there, in the corner, was a gate. Freedom. I ran like I'd never run before, ignoring the pain, the fear, everything except the need to escape. I cleared the gate in a single adrenaline-fueled leap and found myself on a quiet suburban street. Lights were on in nearby houses. I ran to the closest one, pounding on the door. "Help! Please, call the police." An elderly woman opened the door, her eyes widening in shock at my appearance. I must have looked like a madwoman, covered in blood and dirt, my clothes torn. "Please," I gasped. "They're going to kill me." She ushered me inside and called 911. As we waited for the police to arrive, I collapsed on her couch, the adrenaline finally wearing off. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and hospital visits. The Carters were arrested trying to flee the city. Their house of horrors was raided, revealing a sophisticated human trafficking operation that had been running for years. As I sat in the police station, wrapped in a shock blanket, Detective Johnson approached me. "You did good, Sarah," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Thanks to you, we've shut down one of the biggest trafficking rings in the state. You saved a lot of lives today." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The ordeal was over, but I knew the memories would stay with me forever. In the days that followed, as I tried to piece my life back together, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my old job, couldn't bear the thought of walking into strange houses with people I didn't know, but I could use my experience to help others. I started volunteering at a shelter for trafficking survivors, sharing my story, offering hope to those who thought all was lost. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life with purpose. And every time I helped someone escape their own personal hell, I felt a little bit stronger, a little more like myself. The Carters had tried to break me, to turn me into a commodity. But in the end, they'd only made me more determined to fight back. Against them, against the system that allowed such evil to exist, against the darkness that threatens to consume us all. I was no longer just Sarah Reeves, real estate agent. I was a survivor, a fighter, a beacon of hope for those still trapped in the shadows. And that, I realized, was worth more than any commission I could have ever earned. The moment I saw the glint of metal in the driver's hand, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just a ride. It was a trap, and I had walked right into it. As the car sped down an unfamiliar road, my heart raced, and one thought echoed in my mind. How could I have been so stupid? It had started innocently enough. I was hitchhiking across the country, a journey of self-discovery after graduating college. My backpack was light, my spirits were high, and the open road seemed full of promise. I'd had good luck so far, meeting interesting people and seeing parts of America I'd only dreamed about. That fateful day, I'd been standing on the side of a quiet highway for hours, my thumb out, watching car after car zoom by. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, when a blue sedan finally pulled over. The couple inside looked harmless enough. The man, probably in his late 40s, had a friendly smile and crow's feet around his eyes. The woman beside him was younger, with long blonde hair and a gentle face. They introduced themselves as Jack and Linda. "Where you headed, son?" Jack asked, his voice warm and inviting. "West," I replied. "Wherever the road takes me." Linda laughed, a melodic sound. "Well, we're heading to Phoenix. That west enough for you?" I grinned, relief washing over me. "That'd be perfect, thanks." I tossed my backpack in the trunk and climbed into the back seat. As we pulled away, I felt a sense of excitement. This was what hitchhiking was all about, meeting new people, sharing stories, experiencing the kindness of strangers. For the first hour or so, everything seemed great. We chatted easily about my travels, their life in Phoenix, the beauty of the landscape around us. Jack was a salesman, he said, and Linda worked from home as a graphic designer. They had been high school sweethearts, married for 20 years. But as the sky darkened and the miles ticked by, something began to feel off. I noticed Jack taking exits I was pretty sure weren't on the way to Phoenix. When I mentioned it, Linda quickly changed the subject, asking about my family back home. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I pulled out my phone, intending to check our location, only to find we had no signal. Of course, we were in the middle of nowhere. "Everything okay back there?" Jack asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. There was something different in them now, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Yeah," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady, just checking the time. Linda turned in her seat to face me, her smile no longer reaching her eyes. "You must be tired after all that walking. Why don't you get some rest? We'll wake you when we stop for gas." I nodded, pretending to settle in, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. I needed a plan. I needed to get out of this car. That's when I saw it. As Jack reached to adjust the radio, his jacket shifted, revealing the gun holstered at his side. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a wrong turn or a misunderstanding. These people had intentions, and I was certain they weren't good. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Jumping out of a moving car would be suicide. I had to wait for them to slow down, to stop. An opportunity would come. It had to. Hours passed, the landscape outside growing more desolate. We were deep in the desert now, red rocks and cacti replacing the grasslands we'd started in. Jack and Linda had grown quiet, occasionally exchanging looks that made my skin crawl. Finally, mercifully, I saw the glowing lights of a gas station in the distance. My heart leapt. This could be my chance. As we pulled up to the pump, I steeled myself. "Mind if I use the restroom?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jack's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Sure thing. Linda, why don't you go with him? I'll fill up the tank." My hopes deflated. They weren't going to let me out of their sight. Linda smiled, all sweetness and light. "Come on, honey, let's freshen up." As we walked towards the small convenience store, her hand on my arm felt like a vice. I glanced around desperately, looking for anyone who might help. But the station was deserted, save for a bored-looking clerk inside. In the grimy bathroom, I splashed water on my face, my mind racing. I could try to signal the clerk, but what if he was in on it? What if Jack saw and decided to cut his losses, to use that gun? When we returned to the car, Jack was leaning against it, smoking a cigarette. "All set?" he asked, a edge to his voice. I nodded, my mouth dry. As I reached for the back door handle, I saw my opportunity. My backpack was still in the trunk. Oh, could I grab something from my bag real quick? Jack hesitated, then shrugged. Make it fast. I walked to the rear of the car, my heart pounding. As Jack popped the trunk, I took a deep breath. It was now or never. In one fluid motion, I grabbed my backpack and swung it with all my might. It connected with Jack's head with a satisfying thud. He stumbled, caught off guard. I didn't wait to see if he'd fall. I ran. I heard Linda scream, heard Jack's angry shout, but I didn't look back. I ran like I'd never run before, my feet pounding on the asphalt, then on sand as I veered off the road into the desert. A gunshot rang out, the bullet whizzing past my ear. Still, I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Only then did I risk a glance behind me. In the distance, I could see the gas station, now just a pinprick of light. There was no sign of pursuit. I'd made it. But I wasn't safe yet. I was alone in the desert, miles from anywhere, with no water and no idea which direction to go. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape began to wear off, leaving me shaky and terrified. I forced myself to think logically. The highway had to be east of me. If I could find it, I could flag down a car, get help. But could I trust anyone after what had just happened? I started walking, using the stars to guide me. The desert night was cold, and I shivered in my thin t-shirt. Every sound made me jump. The rustle of a snake in the underbrush, the hoot of an owl overhead. I kept expecting to hear a car engine, to see headlights cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing. As the sky began to lighten, I heard something that made my heart soar, the distant rumble of traffic. I quickened my pace, ignoring my aching feet and parched throat. Soon, I could see it. The highway, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert. I stumbled onto the shoulder just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. A semi-truck appeared in the distance, and I waved my arms frantically. To my immense relief, it slowed and pulled over. The driver, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, looked at me with concern. "You okay, kid? You look like you've been through hell." I nearly wept with relief. "Please," I croaked, my voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "I need help. Some people, they tried to..." I couldn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need to. Understanding dawned in the driver's eyes. He reached behind his seat and handed me a bottle of water. "Drink this," he said gently. "Then we'll call the cops. You're safe now." As I gulped down the water, the reality of what I'd escaped began to sink in. Jack and Linda weren't just giving a ride to a lonely hitchhiker. They were predators, hunting for victims on the open road. How many others had fallen into their trap? How many hadn't been as lucky as me? The police took my statement, their faces grim as I recounted my ordeal. They told me Jack and Linda matched the description of a couple suspected in a string of disappearances across 3 states. Thanks to my escape and description, they had solid leads to follow. In the days that followed, as I gave more statements and tried to process what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to becoming another statistic. My carefree journey of self-discovery had turned into a nightmare, one that would haunt me for years to come. But as I boarded a bus back home, my hitchhiking days firmly behind me, I realized something. I had survived. I had outsmarted them, outrun them. They had tried to make me a victim, but instead, they had made me a survivor. The open road still called to me, but now I knew its dangers as well as its beauty. I would travel again someday, but with my eyes wide open, aware that behind every friendly smile could lurk a hidden danger. My journey of self-discovery wasn't over. It had just taken a turn I never expected. And in the end, I had discovered something vital, my own strength, my will to survive. It wasn't the lesson I'd set out to learn, but it was one I would carry with me always. The creak of the cabin door made my blood run cold. I'd been alone in these woods for days, but now, as the handle slowly turned, I realized my solitude had been an illusion. Someone was here, and judging by the hushed whispers and metallic clicks I heard outside, they weren't the welcoming kind. It had all started as a simple solo hiking trip. I'd been planning it for months, eager to escape the chaos of city life and reconnect with nature. The Appalachian Trail seemed like the perfect challenge, beautiful, rugged, and just remote enough to offer the solitude I craved. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for. I reveled in the crisp mountain air, the stunning vistas, and the profound silence that settled over the forest at night. My muscles ached from the long days of hiking, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that reminded me I was alive and pushing my limits. On the fourth day, the weather took a turn. Dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them a torrential downpour that showed no signs of letting up. I knew I needed to find shelter, and fast. That's when I spotted it, an old cabin, half hidden among the trees. At first, I was relieved. The cabin looked abandoned, its windows dark and a thick layer of moss covering the roof. But it was sturdy, and more importantly, it was dry. I figured I could wait out the storm there and continue my journey once the rain passed. I approached cautiously, calling out a hello just in case someone was home. When no answer came, I tested the door. To my surprise, it swung open easily, hinges creaking in protest. The interior was musty, but surprisingly well preserved. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but the furniture was intact. A small table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a narrow bed against the far wall. It looked like whoever had lived here had simply walked away one day and never returned. I set down my backpack and started to explore. There were a few old canned goods in the cupboards, their labels faded but still readable. A collection of dusty books lined a small shelf, mostly field guides and local history. It was clear that whoever had lived here had been a true outdoorsman. As the day wore on and the rain showed no signs of stopping, I decided to make the best of the situation. I got a fire going in the stove, its warmth driving away the damp chill. I even found an old deck of cards and spent the evening playing solitaire by candlelight. It was almost cozy. For the first time in days, I felt truly relaxed. The patter of rain on the roof and the crackling of the fire lulled me into a sense of security. I fell asleep that night, feeling safe and content. I woke the next morning to find the rain had stopped, but a thick fog had settled over the forest. Visibility was poor, and I knew trying to navigate the trail in these conditions would be foolish. I resigned myself to another day in the cabin, grateful for the shelter. It was mid-afternoon when I first noticed something odd. As I was reorganizing my backpack, I could have sworn I saw movement outside the window. Just a flicker in the mist, gone almost as soon as I'd seen it. I told myself it was probably just an animal, a deer, maybe, or a large bird. But then I heard it, a twig snapping, followed by the unmistakable sound of hushed voices. My heart began to race. I moved to the window, straining to see through the fog. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, like ghosts materializing from the mist, I saw them. 3 figures, moving with purpose towards the cabin. Panic set in. Who were they? What did they want? My mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Lost hikers wouldn't move with such stealth. Rangers would announce themselves. No, these people, whoever they were, didn't want to be seen. I looked around frantically for a place to hide. The cabin was small, with few options. Under the bed, too obvious. The cupboards, too small. My eyes landed on a hatch in the ceiling I hadn't noticed before. An attic. With shaking hands, I pulled down the ladder and climbed up, pulling my backpack after me. I just managed to close the hatch when I heard them at the door. The creak of hinges, footsteps on the wooden floor. Then, voices. Somebody's been here, a gruff male voice said. Fire's still warm. Check outside. Another voice, female this time. Make sure they didn't just step out. I held my breath, afraid even the sound of my heartbeat might give me away. Through gaps in the floorboards, I could see them moving around below. 3 of them, just as I'd seen outside. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in dark clothing. "Bag here," the second man said. "Hiker, probably." "Shit," the woman hissed. "If they made it this far..." "We'll find them," the first man assured her. "Can't have anyone stumbling onto our operation. Boss would have our heads." Operation? My mind reeled. What had I stumbled into? They continued to search the cabin, rifling through my belongings. I watched, helpless, as they went through my wallet, looking at my ID. "Sarah Jenkins," the woman read aloud. "Got an address in Boston. Long way from home, aren't you, Sarah?" I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. They knew my name. They knew where I lived. The gravity of my situation hit me like a physical blow. These weren't just criminals I'd stumbled upon. They were dangerous, and they now saw me as a threat. "We'll need to move everything," the first man said. "Can't risk her finding her way back here and bringing the cops." "What about the girl?" the second man asked. There was a long pause. My blood ran cold as I waited for the answer. "We find her," the woman said finally, her voice hard. "And we make sure she never tells anyone what she saw." They continued to talk, discussing plans to search the surrounding area. I remained frozen in the attic, scarcely daring to breathe. Hours passed. At some point, they left the cabin, but I was too afraid to move, certain they were still out there, searching. As night fell, I heard them return. They spoke in low voices, frustrated by their lack of success in finding me. They decided to sleep in shifts in order to catch me if I tried to return in the night. I knew I couldn't stay in the attic forever. Sooner or later, they'd think to look up here, or I'd make a noise and give myself away. I had to escape, but how? The answer came to me as I listened to the sound of gentle snoring below. 2 asleep, 1 awake. It was the best chance I was going to get. Moving as silently as I could, I eased open the attic hatch. The cabin was dark, lit only by the faint glow of dying embers in the stove. I could make out 2 figures on the bed, and a third silhouette by the window. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. It was now or never. I dropped from the attic, landing as softly as I could. The figure by the window whirled around, but I was already moving. I grabbed the cast iron pan from the stove and swung with all my might. There was a sickening thud, and the figure crumpled. The noise woke the others, but I was already at the door. I burst out into the night, my legs pumping furiously as I ran blindly into the forest. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the crash of underbrush as they gave chase. I ran like I'd never run before, ducking under branches and leaping over fallen logs. My lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest, but fear kept me going. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the normal nighttime noises of the forest. Still, I didn't stop. I couldn't risk it. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I finally allowed myself to slow down. I was lost, exhausted, and terrified. But I was alive. It took 2 more days of cautious travel before I found my way to a ranger station. The authorities were skeptical of my story at first, but a search of the area revealed evidence that corroborated my account. The cabin, and when they found it, had been cleared out, but traces remained of what the police called an insignificant illegal operation. As I gave my statement and tried to come to terms with what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to becoming another statistic, another mysterious disappearance in the vast wilderness. My peaceful hiking trip had turned into a nightmare, one that would haunt me for years to come. But as I boarded the bus back to Boston, I realized something. I had survived. I had outsmarted them, outrun them. They had tried to make me a victim, but instead, they had made me a survivor. The mountains still called to me, their beauty undimmed by my ordeal. I knew I would return someday to finish the journey I had started, but next time, I wouldn't be alone, and I would carry with me the knowledge that sometimes the greatest dangers we face aren't from nature, but from our fellow human beings. The moment the truck veered towards me, I knew this was no accident. The murderous intent in the driver's eyes was clear even through the rain-streaked windshield. As I swerved off the road, my tires skidding on the wet asphalt, one thought blazed through my mind. They had found me, and they weren't going to let me escape this time. It had all started 3 days ago. I was driving cross-country, moving from New York to Los Angeles for a fresh start after a messy divorce. The long, lonely stretches of highway through the Midwest were monotonous, but I found a strange peace in the solitude. That peace was shattered at a nondescript gas station just outside of Omaha. I was filling up my tank when I noticed two men arguing near the convenience store. It seemed heated, but I didn't think much of it until I heard a gunshot. The next few moments were a blur. One man fell, clutching his chest. The other looked around wildly, his eyes locking with mine. I saw the gun in his hand, saw the panic and desperation on his face. In that instant, I knew I had become a witness to something I was never meant to see. I jumped into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out of the gas station, I saw the man running towards me in my rearview mirror. I hit the highway doing 90, my heart pounding in my chest. For the next few hours, I drove like a woman possessed, constantly checking my mirrors, sure that at any moment I'd see a car in pursuit. When I finally allowed myself to slow down, I realized the gravity of my situation. I had witnessed a murder, and the killer had seen me. I was the only thing standing between him and freedom. I debated going to the police, but fear held me back. What if they didn't believe me? What if the killer had connections? People who could find me even if I went into protective custody? Paranoia, fueled by too many crime dramas and my own terrified imagination, made every option seem dangerous. So I kept driving, pushing on through the night, through 3 states. I avoided main highways, sticking to back roads and small towns. I paid for everything in cash, used fake names at motels, and kept my interactions with people to a minimum. By the 3rd day, exhaustion was taking its toll. The constant vigilance, the lack of sleep, the gnawing fear in my gut. It was all becoming too much. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I needed to make a decision to find help. That's when I saw the truck. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another vehicle on the road. But as the miles ticked by, I noticed it was always there, a few cars back, never getting closer, but never falling behind either. Paranoia flared. Was I imagining things? Had lack of sleep made me jumpy? I took a random exit, heart in my throat as I watched my rearview mirror. The truck followed. Panic set in. I accelerated, weaving through the light traffic on the county road. The truck kept pace, getting closer now, no longer trying to hide its pursuit. Rain started to fall, fat drops splattering against my windshield. I turned on my wipers, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That's when the truck made its move, pulling up alongside me. I risked a glance over, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't the killer from the gas station. This was someone new, someone I'd never seen before. But the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was here to silence me. The truck swerved towards me, metal screeching as it scraped along the side of my car. I jerked the wheel, desperately trying to keep control. We were on a bridge, concrete barriers on either side leaving no room for error. Another vicious swerve from the truck sent me spinning. I felt a moment of weightlessness as my car broke through the barrier, then a sickening lurch as gravity took hold. The world outside my windows became a blur of gray sky and dark water as my car plummeted towards the river below. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Cold water rushed in through shattered windows as the car began to sink. Training from a long-ago swimming class kicked in. Wait for the car to fill with water. Then the pressure will equalize and you can open the door. But panic is a powerful thing. As the water rose past my chest, my seatbelt refused to unlatch. I clawed at it frantically, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as the water reached my chin, the belt finally gave way. I took one last, desperate gulp of air as the car was fully submerged. The pressure inside equalized, and I managed to force the door open. I swam out, my lungs burning, my clothes dragging me down. The surface seemed impossibly far away. My vision started to darken around the edges. Just as I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, my head broke the surface. I gasped, sucking in great lungfuls of air. The current was strong, dragging me downstream. I could see the bridge in the distance, the broken barrier where my car had gone through. There was no sign of the truck or its driver. I managed to make it to the shore, dragging myself out of the water on trembling limbs. I collapsed on the muddy bank, coughing and shivering. I was alive, but I knew this was far from over. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of my situation sank in. I was miles from anywhere, soaking wet, with no car, no phone, and no idea who was after me or why. The killer from the gas station was bad enough, but now there were others involved. This was bigger than I had imagined. I couldn't stay here. Whoever had run me off the road would surely come looking to confirm I was dead. I forced myself to my feet, my body protesting every movement. I needed to find help, but I couldn't trust anyone. For all I knew, the killer had contacts in law enforcement. No one was safe. I started walking, following the river downstream. My wet clothes clung to me, chafing with every step. The rain had stopped, but a cold wind had picked up, cutting through my sodden jacket. I hugged myself for warmth, trying to ignore the tremors that racked my body. As night fell, the full moon provided just enough light to navigate by. I stuck to the cover of trees along the riverbank, jumping at every snapping twig or rustle of leaves. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Who were these people? Why were they so desperate to silence me? What had I stumbled into? After what felt like hours of walking, I saw lights in the distance. A small town, nestled in the valley. Civilization, and with it, the promise of help, but also the threat of discovery. I approached cautiously, sticking to shadows. The town was small, just a main street with a handful of businesses and houses. A diner on the corner was still open, warm light spilling out onto the sidewalk. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten in nearly a day. But food would have to wait. I needed information and a way out of here. My eyes landed on a small building across the street, the local library. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Breaking in was easier than I expected. Small towns and their trusting nature. The window latch was flimsy, giving way with minimal effort. I slipped inside, praying there was no alarm system. The computer at the front desk was ancient, but it worked. I Googled the gas station where this had all started, searching for any news about a shooting. Nothing. It was as if it had never happened. I broadened my search, looking for any recent crimes or suspicious activities in the area. That's when I found it. A small article about a string of unexplained disappearances along the I-80 corridor. Truckers, mostly, gone without a trace. The police had no leads, but locals whispered about a shadowy organization, a modern-day highway pirates preying on unsuspecting travelers. My blood ran cold as I read. Had I stumbled upon something bigger than a simple murder? Was this why they were so desperate to silence me? A noise outside made me jump. Headlights swept across the window as a car drove by slowly. Too slowly. I ducked down, my heart pounding. Had they found me already? I waited, barely breathing, for what felt like an eternity. When I finally dared to peek out, the street was empty. But I knew I couldn't stay here. It wasn't safe. Nowhere was safe. As I slipped out of the library and into the night, I knew my ordeal was far from over. I was in way over my head, caught up in something I didn't understand. But I was alive, and as long as I was breathing, I had a chance. I started walking again, this time with purpose. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop. They were out there, watching, waiting, and I was determined to stay one step ahead, no matter what it took. The road stretched out before me, dark and full of unknowns. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had survived their first attempt to silence me. I had information now, a piece of the puzzle. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I walked into the unknown, one thought kept me going. I would find the truth, and I would make them pay. They had tried to kill me, but they had only made me stronger. And now, I was coming for them. The first video file I opened showed a man being tortured. The second revealed a drug deal gone wrong. By the third, I realized the laptop I'd bought wasn't just used. It was evidence of something far more sinister. And now, as I stared at the car parked across the street, I knew they had come for it, and for me. It all started innocently enough. My old laptop had finally given up the ghost after years of faithful service. And as a freelance graphic designer, I couldn't afford to be without a computer for long. Money was tight, so I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find a decent used machine that wouldn't break the bank. That's how I met Derek. His ad seemed perfect, a high-spec laptop for a fraction of its retail price. When I arrived at the coffee shop to meet him, I found a nervous-looking guy in his 30s, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "You must be Alex," he said, forcing a smile. "Here's the laptop. It's all yours." I gave it a quick once-over. It looked to be in good condition, and when I booted it up, everything seemed to work fine. I handed over the cash, and Derek practically bolted out of the cafe. At the time, I chalked it up to social awkwardness. If only I'd known. Back home, I spent the evening setting up my new purchase, transferring files and installing software. It was close to midnight when I stumbled upon the hidden folder. It was buried deep in the system files, innocuously named Backup Data. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. What I saw made my blood run cold. Video files, hundreds of them, with names like Warehouse Pickups 03 and Johnson's Interrogation. My finger hovered over the mouse, a voice in my head screaming not to open them. But I had to know. The first video started playing, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. A man, bloodied and bruised, was strapped to a chair. Off camera, someone was asking questions, their voice distorted. When the man refused to answer, his fingernail was slowly pulled off with pliers. His screams would haunt my nightmares for weeks to come. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. What had I gotten myself into? Who was Derek, really? And more importantly, who were the people in these videos? Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, debating what to do. Go to the police. But what if they were involved? The level of organization I'd glimpsed in those files suggested this wasn't some small-time operation. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to know more before I did anything. I spent the day combing through the files, careful not to actually open any more videos. There were documents, ledgers, shipping manifests, what looked like coded messages. It was clear I'd stumbled onto something big, something dangerous. As evening fell, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It could have been nothing, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I peered out through the blinds, and my heart nearly stopped. A man was sitting in the driver's seat and staring directly at my apartment. Panic set in. They knew. Somehow they'd tracked the laptop to me. My mind raced through possibilities. Had Derek sold me out? Was the laptop itself being tracked? I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but stopped short. Who could I trust? If this organization was as big as I suspected, they could have people anywhere. A plan began to form. I couldn't stay here, that much was clear. But I couldn't just run either. Not with what I knew. I had a responsibility now, a duty to expose whatever this was. I quickly packed a bag, clothes, some cash I had stashed away, basic toiletries. Then I turned to the laptop. I couldn't risk taking it with me, but I couldn't leave it behind either. I pulled out the hard drive, slipped it into my bag, and then, in a moment of inspiration, replaced it with the drive from my old laptop. To anyone checking, it would look like an ordinary computer. Just as I finished, there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. "Mr. Wilson," a deep voice called out. "We need to speak with you about a recent purchase you made." I didn't answer. Instead, I quietly made my way to the fire escape outside my bedroom window. As I climbed down, I heard the sound of my front door being broken down. My feet hit the alley pavement, and I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop. The sound of shouts behind me spurred me on. I ran for what felt like hours, taking random turns, doubling back, anything to lose any potential tail. Finally, exhausted and out of breath, I ducked into a 24-hour diner. The waitress gave me an odd look as I slid into a booth, but didn't say anything. I ordered a coffee with shaking hands, then pulled out my phone. I needed help. But who could I trust? An idea struck me. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend. She worked as an investigative journalist for the local paper. If anyone could help me make sense of this and get the information to the right people, it was her. I dialed her number, praying she'd pick up despite the late hour. "Alex?" she answered, her voice groggy with sleep. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Sarah, I'm sorry, but I need your help," I said, my voice low. "I'm in trouble, big trouble, and I think I've uncovered something huge." There was a pause. "Are you drunk?" "I wish I was," I replied. "Can you meet me? Please? I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." She must have heard the desperation in my voice. "Okay," she said finally. "Where are you?" I gave her the address of the diner, then hung up. As I waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every person who entered made me flinch. Every car that drove by seemed suspicious. Sarah arrived about 20 minutes later, looking concerned and a little annoyed. "All right, Alex," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, then told her everything. As I spoke, her expression changed from skepticism to shock, and finally to a grim determination I recognized from our days together. The look she got when she was onto a big story. "Show me," she said when I finished. I pulled out my laptop and booted it up. Her eyes widened as I opened file after file, revealing the scope of what I'd discovered. "Alex," she said slowly, "do you realize what this is? This isn't just some criminal organization. This is evidence of corruption at the highest levels. Politicians, police chiefs, judges, they're all implicated in these files." My mouth went dry. "What do we do?" Sarah thought for a moment. "We can't go to the police, not yet. We need to verify this information, find corroborating evidence, and we need to keep you safe." She pulled out her own laptop and began typing furiously. "I'm emailing my editor. We're going to need resources for this protection." As she worked, I glanced out the window. My heart nearly stopped. The dark sedan from earlier was pulling into the parking lot. "Sarah," I hissed, "we need to go, now." She looked up, saw my expression, and nodded. We quickly packed up our things and headed for the back exit. As we slipped out into the night, I heard shouts behind us. They'd found us. "My car's this way," Sarah said, grabbing my hand. We ran through alleyways and side streets, the sound of pursuit never far behind. We finally reached her car, an old but reliable Honda Civic. As we peeled out of the parking spot, I saw two men round the corner, their faces twisted with anger. "Where are we going?" I asked, as Sarah navigated the empty streets. "I have a cabin upstate," she replied, her eyes on the road. "It's off the grid. We'll be safe there while we figure this out." As the city lights faded behind us and the highway stretched out ahead, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. In the span of 24 hours, my life had been turned upside down. I was a fugitive, running from shadowy forces I didn't fully understand. But I wasn't alone, and for the first time since this all began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever I'd stumbled into, whatever dangers lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: the truth would come out. It had to. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I made a silent vow. I would see this through, no matter the cost. The laptop I'd bought on a whim had thrust me into a world of danger and intrigue, but it had also given me a purpose, and I was determined to see it through to the end. The first shadow I saw could have been a trick of the light. The second, maybe my imagination running wild. But when I heard the whispers coming from behind the walls, I knew with chilling certainty that I wasn't alone in this sprawling, haunted mansion. And whatever was in here with me, it wasn't human. I'd taken the job as an overnight caretaker at Ravencrest Manor out of desperation. Fresh out of college with a mountain of student debt and no promising job prospects. The ad had seemed like a godsend. Historic mansion seeks live-in caretaker. Night shifts only. Excellent pay. It seemed too good to be true, and as I was learning, it probably was. The interview had been odd from the start. The owner, a reclusive old woman named Mrs. Blackwood, had peered at me through thick glasses, her eyes magnified to an unsettling degree. "You're not afraid of the dark, are you, dear?" she'd asked, her voice raspy and thin. I'd laughed nervously. "No, ma'am, not at all." She'd nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. You'll need a strong constitution for this job. The nights can be long at Ravencrest." I should have heeded the warning in her words, but the promise of a paycheck and a roof over my head had overridden any misgivings. My first night at Ravencrest had been uneventful, if a bit eerie. The mansion was massive, a sprawling Victorian monstrosity with more rooms than I could count. My duties were simple: patrol the halls, ensure all doors and windows were locked, and report any disturbances. Simple enough, I thought. It was on my third night that things began to get strange. I was making my usual rounds when I heard it, a soft, melodic humming coming from one of the unused bedrooms. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling as I pointed it at the closed door. The humming stopped abruptly. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, just as I'd convinced myself I'd imagined it, a giggle, high-pitched and childlike. It sent shivers down my spine. I approached the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. It was ice cold to the touch. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The room was empty, moonlight streaming through the large windows and illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. But there, in the center of the room, was a small handprint in the dust on the floor. A child's handprint. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of prank, right? Maybe the day staff were hazing the new girl. But as the nights wore on, the incidents became harder to explain away. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. Doors I'd sworn I'd locked would be wide open on my next pass. And always, the feeling of being watched. It came to a head on my 7th night. I was in the mansion's vast library, reshelving some books that had mysteriously ended up on the floor. As I reached up to place a heavy tome on the top shelf, I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down, expecting to see a mouse, or maybe one of the mansion's many stray cats. Instead, I saw a small, pale hand reaching out from behind a bookcase. I stumbled back, books clattering to the floor around me. The hand retreated, and I heard that same childlike giggle from before, this time accompanied by the patter of small feet running away. "This isn't funny," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Whoever's doing this, come out now." The only response was the creaking of the old house settling. I ran from the library, no longer caring about my duties or my job. I just wanted out. But as I reached the main foyer, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A figure stood at the top of the grand staircase. It was Mrs. Blackwood, but not as I'd seen her before. She looked younger, somehow. Her hair was black instead of gray, her posture straight and regal. "Leaving so soon, my dear?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "What's going on here?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What is this place?" She smiled, and in that moment, she didn't look human at all. Ravencrest has always attracted the young and the desperate. It feeds on them, you see. Their fear, their vitality. As she spoke, more figures began to appear. Children in old-fashioned clothes, their eyes hollow and dark. A man in a butler's uniform with a gaping wound in his chest. A woman in a maid's outfit, her neck bent at an impossible angle. "What are you?" I whispered, backing towards the door. Mrs. Blackwood's smile widened, revealing too many teeth. "We are the caretakers of Ravencrest. And now, my dear, so are you." I turned and ran, yanking at the front door. It wouldn't budge. Behind me, I could hear them approaching, their whispers growing louder. In desperation, I grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table and smashed it against the nearest window. The glass shattered, and I dove through, ignoring the cuts and scrapes as I tumbled onto the overgrown lawn. I ran into the night, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where a passing trucker took pity on me and gave me a ride into town. I went to the police. I, of course, told them everything. They listened politely, then informed me that Ravencrest Manor had burned down in 1954. There was nothing there but an empty, overgrown lot. I didn't believe them. I couldn't. The next day, I drove back out to the mansion, determined to prove I wasn't crazy. But there it was, just as the police had said, a sprawling out empty lot, overgrown with weeds and scattered with the charred remnants of a long-ago fire. No mansion, no Mrs. Blackwood, no ghosts. As I stood there, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew I had experienced, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, in the tall grass, was a glint of something metallic. I approached cautiously, my heart in my throat. It was the candlestick, the one I'd used to break the window. It lay there, impossible and undeniable. A piece of evidence from a place that supposedly didn't exist. I left it there, too afraid to touch it. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw the mansion, standing tall and imposing against the sky, and in an upstairs window, a pale face watching me leave. I never went back to Ravencrest. I moved out of state, changed my name, did everything I could to put that night behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers, still see the shadows moving in the corners of my vision. And I wonder, did I ever really leave Ravencrest at all? Or is it still there, waiting for me, ready to claim its newest caretaker? The job offer still appears sometimes, in small local papers or on obscure websites. Historic mansion seeks live-in caretaker, night shifts only, excellent pay. And I know somewhere out there, another desperate soul is seeing it, thinking it's the answer to their prayers. I want to warn them, to tell them to run, to stay away from Ravencrest and its hungry ghosts. But who would believe me? Who would listen to the ravings of a person who claims to have worked in a mansion that burned down decades ago? So I stay silent, and I watch, and I wait. And every night, I check my doors and windows, and I leave a light on, because I know now that the dark isn't empty. And sometimes, if you look too long into the shadows start looking back. The experience at Ravencrest changed me. I no longer see the world as I once did. Every old building holds secrets. Every shadow could hide something unnatural. I've become a collector of strange stories, a seeker of the unexplained, because I know now that there's more to our world than most people ever see. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the house creaks, I find myself longing for the long corridors of Ravencrest, for the whispers in the walls and the giggle of ghostly children. because as terrifying as it was also thrilling. It was real in a way that nothing in my life has been since. But then I remember Mrs. Blackwood's smile, too wide and too sharp, and the cold touch of spectral hands. And I know that some doors once opened can never truly be closed again, so I stay away and I warn others as best I can. But a part of me knows that someday, somehow, Ravencrest will call me back. And when it does, I don't know if I'll have the strength to resist its siren song. Because once you've glimpsed the other side, the normal world never quite feels like home again. The moment I saw the townspeople's eyes, I knew we had driven into something far worse than a simple pit stop. There was a vacancy in their stares, a hollowness that sent chills down my spine. As my wife asked for directions, I realized with growing horror that we hadn't found help. We had stumbled into a trap. It had started as a routine road trip. Sarah and I were driving cross-country to her parents' place for Thanksgiving. We'd done this drive a dozen times before, but this year we decided to take a scenic route, hoping to see some of the charming small towns that dot the American landscape. That decision would prove to be a grave mistake. We were somewhere in the Midwest, surrounded by endless fields of corn and wheat, when our car started making an ominous clanking noise. I'm no mechanic, but even I knew this wasn't good. We limped along for a few more miles before the engine gave out completely, leaving us stranded on a lonely stretch of highway as the sun began to set. "There's got to be a town nearby," Sarah said, peering at her phone, "but I'm not getting any signal out here." I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. We passed a sign a few miles back. Silver Creek, I think it said. Can't be too far. We gathered what we could carry and started walking. The November air was crisp, and a light fog had begun to roll in, obscuring the road ahead. As we walked, the silence struck me. No crickets, no rustling of small animals in the grass, just our footsteps and the occasional gust of wind. After what felt like hours, we saw lights in the distance. Relief washed over us as we quickened our pace. Silver Creek emerged from the mist like a mirage, a small cluster of buildings that looked like they hadn't changed much since the 1950s. The town was eerily quiet for early evening. No cars on the streets, no people walking about. Most of the storefronts were dark, but we spotted a diner with its lights still on. "Thank God," Sarah muttered. "Maybe they have a phone we can use." As we approached the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The neon "open" sign flickered erratically, and through the windows, I could see a few patrons sitting unnaturally still in their booths. The bell above the door jangled as we entered, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet diner. Every head turned to look at us, moving in perfect unison. Their eyes, there was something wrong with their eyes. They were glassy, unfocused, like those of a taxidermied animal. Hi," Sarah said, her voice wavering slightly. "Our car broke down a few miles back. Could we use your phone to call a tow truck?" For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, they all smiled. It wasn't a warm or welcoming smile. It was mechanical, rehearsed, like they were trying to remember how smiling worked. A waitress approached us, her movements stiff and jerky. "Welcome to Silver Creek," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "We don't get many visitors here." "I can see why," I muttered under my breath. Sarah elbowed me in the ribs. "About that phone," Sarah began, but the waitress continued as if she hadn't heard. "You must be tired from your journey. Why don't you sit down? Have some pie. Our cherry pie is famous in these parts." Before we could protest, she had ushered us into a booth. The other patrons were still staring, still smiling those unsettling smiles. "Look," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "We appreciate the hospitality, but we really need to get going. If we could just use your phone." Now, the waitress interrupted, her smile never wavering. "There's no need to rush off. You're our guests, and guests in Silver Creek always stay for pie." As if on cue, A man emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 plates of cherry pie. He set them down in front of us with robotic precision. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Something was very, very wrong here. "It's getting late," Sarah said, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness. "We should really find a place to stay for the night. Is there a motel in town?" The waitress's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, we have plenty of room for you here. Silver Creek always has room for new residents." The way she said residents sent a chill down my spine. I stood up abruptly, grabbing Sarah's hand. "Thanks for the offer, but we'll be going now." As we moved towards the door, the other patrons stood up in unison. They formed a wall between us and the exit, their faces still fixed in those eerie smiles. "Now, don't be rude," the waitress said, all pretense of friendliness gone from her voice. "You haven't even tried the pie." I looked around frantically for another way out. The kitchen. If we could just get through there, maybe we could find a back door. "Run," I whispered to Sarah. Then, louder, "Look, a UFO." It was a desperate ploy, but it worked. For just a second, every head in the diner turned to look out the window. That second was all we needed. We bolted for the kitchen, shoving past the startled cook. Behind us, I could hear the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as our pursuers gave chase. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and hanging utensils. We dodged around prep tables and vats of bubbling liquid that I was pretty sure wasn't soup. At the back, just as I'd hoped, was a door marked exit. I slammed into it with my shoulder, and we burst out into the cool night air. But our relief was short-lived. The entire town seemed to have awakened. Figures were emerging from every building, all moving towards us with that same unnatural gait. "This way," Sarah hissed, pulling me towards a narrow alley between 2 buildings. We ran, our feet pounding on the pavement, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind us. The alley opened up onto another street, but it was no use. They were everywhere, closing in from all sides. Their faces were all the same now, blank, emotionless, with those terrifyingly vacant eyes. "What do they want?" Sarah gasped as we backed up against a wall. As if in answer, the crowd parted, and a figure stepped forward. It was an old man, his back hunched, leaning heavily on a cane. Unlike the others, his eyes were sharp and alert. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "We've been waiting for you." "What is this place?" I demanded. "What do you want from us?" The old man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Silver Creek has always been here, waiting for lost souls like yourselves. We need new blood, you see, new minds to join our community." As he spoke, I noticed something odd. The other townspeople were changing. Their skin was becoming translucent, their features blurring. They looked less and less human with each passing second. "You're not really people, are you?" Sarah whispered, horror dawning on her face. The old man's smile widened impossibly. "We were once, but Silver Creek changed us, improved us, and now it's your turn." He raised his cane, and the crowd surged forward. I felt cold hands grabbing at me, pulling me down. Sarah's scream was cut short as she was engulfed by the mass of not quite human bodies. I fought, clawing and kicking, but there were too many. As I felt my consciousness slipping away, I saw the old man standing over me, his form shimmering and changing. "Welcome home," he said, and then everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was lying in a bed in what looked like a quaint country inn. Sarah was next to me, still unconscious. For a moment, I thought it had all been a terrible dream. Then I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror across the room. My eyes. They were different. Glassy. Unfocused. Like those of a taxidermied animal. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Instead, it curved into a wide, unnatural smile. Through the window, I could see the sun rising over Silver Creek. It looked like a perfect small town now, straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that Sarah and I would be greeting the next lost travelers who stumbled into our little slice of Americana. Welcome to Silver Creek, where everyone smiles and no one ever leaves. The instant I saw my motorcycle disappear around the corner, I knew I'd made a catastrophic mistake. The sick feeling in my stomach wasn't just about losing my prized possession. It was the chilling realization that I had invited a predator into my life, and now he knew exactly where I lived. It had started innocently enough. I'd decided to sell my beloved Harley Davidson, a decision born more out of financial necessity than desire. The bike had been my companion through countless road trips and late-night rides, but mounting bills and a recent layoff meant sacrifices had to be made. I posted an ad online, complete with photos and a detailed description. Within hours, I received a message from a guy named Mike. He seemed genuine, asking intelligent questions about the bike's history and maintenance. We arranged to meet the next day for him to take a look. When Mike arrived, he looked the part of a seasoned rider, leather jacket, well-worn boots, and a knowledgeable glint in his eye as he circled the bike. We chatted easily about motorcycles and the open road. For a moment, I even felt a pang of regret about selling. "Mind if I take her for a spin?" Mike asked, his hand resting on the handlebar. "Just around the block, to get a feel for her." I hesitated. It wasn't an unusual request when buying a bike, but something in my gut twinged. I pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to seller's nerves. "Sure," I said, handing over the keys. "Just be careful with her." Mike's face split into a wide grin as he swung his leg over the seat. The engine roared to life, and he gave me a quick salute before pulling away from the curb. I stood there, watching as he rounded the corner at the end of my street. The sound of the engine faded, and I waited for it to grow loud again as he completed the block. But the sound never came back. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. The sick feeling in my stomach grew. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police, when I saw a notification, a new message, from Mike. "Thanks for the bike, sucker. Better lock your doors tonight." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a theft. It was a threat. I rushed inside, my hands shaking as I locked every door and window. My mind raced. How could I have been so stupid? I'd invited this man to my home, shown him where I lived, and now he had my bike and, it seemed, plans to come back for more. The police were sympathetic but not particularly helpful. They took my statement, but without the bike's GPS tracker, which I had stupidly disconnected when I decided to sell, they didn't have much to go on. They promised to keep an eye out and suggested I stay with a friend for a few days. But I couldn't bring myself to leave. This was my home, and damned if I was going to let some thief scare me out of it. As night fell, every sound became magnified. The creak of the house settling sounded like footsteps. The rustle of leaves outside my window became whispered threats. Sleep was impossible. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. The low rumble of a motorcycle engine, growing louder as it approached. My heart pounded as I peered through the blinds. There, at the end of my driveway, was my Harley, and astride it, his face obscured by a helmet, was a figure I assumed was Mike. He sat there for what felt like hours, the bike idling. Was he taunting me, planning his next move? I debated calling the police again, but feared what might happen in the time it took them to arrive. Finally, the figure revved the engine and sped off into the night. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, but my relief was short-lived. This, I knew, was far from over. The next day, I was a wreck. Exhaustion and fear had left me jumpy and irritable. I called in sick to my new job, unable to focus on anything but the threat hanging over me. As I made yet another pot of coffee, my phone buzzed. Another message from Mike. "Miss me? Don't worry. I'll be back. Maybe tonight, maybe not. Sweet dreams." That was it. I couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows and waiting for the other shoe to drop. I needed to take action. I spent the day preparing. I dug out the old baseball bat from my college days and kept it close. I set up makeshift alarms on all the doors and windows, empty cans balanced precariously, ready to clatter to the ground at the slightest disturbance. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I was doing something. As darkness fell, I positioned myself in the living room, lights off, bat in hand. The hours crept by, each car passing on the street making my heart race. Just as my vigilance began to wane, I heard it, the sound of my bike, approaching slowly. This time there was no idle threat from the driveway. The engine cut off, and I heard footsteps on my front porch. The doorknob rattled. Once, twice, then silence. I gripped the bat tighter, my palms slick with sweat. For a long moment, nothing happened. Had he given up? The answer came in the form of shattering glass. He was coming through the window. I didn't think. I acted. As a dark figure climbed through the broken window, I swung the bat with all my might. There was a satisfying thunk and a cry of pain. The intruder stumbled, and I swung again, catching him in the ribs. He went down hard, cursing and gasping for breath. I fumbled for the lights, bat still raised defensively. In the sudden brightness, I got my first clear look at my tormentor. It wasn't Mike. This man was older, his face weathered and scarred. He glared up at me with a mixture of pain and rage. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. He spat blood onto my carpet. "Doesn't matter. Your buddy Mike owed me. Said I could have the bike to settle his debt. Figured I'd see what else you had worth taking." My mind reeled. Mike, the supposed buyer, had set me up. He'd used me to pay off his debts, knowing full well what kind of person he was sending my way. The sound of sirens cut through the night. A neighbor, roused by the commotion, had called the police. As the patrol car pulled up outside, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and insurance claims. The man who broke in, it turned out, had a long record of similar crimes. He was headed back to prison for a long time. My bike was recovered a few days later, abandoned in a parking lot across town. But as I stood looking at it, I felt none of the joy or excitement it had once brought me. All I could think about was the fear, the violation I'd experienced. I sold it for real this time, to a dealer. The money went towards a security system for my house. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. Some might call it paranoia. But to me, it was a small price to pay for peace of mind. Weeks passed, and slowly, life began to return to normal. But something had changed in me. I found myself more cautious, more suspicious of strangers. The trust I once had in people had been shaken to its core. One day, as I was leaving work, I saw a man leaning against a motorcycle in the parking lot. For a moment, my heart raced, old fears resurging. But as I got closer, I realized it was just a coworker, admiring his new bike. "Hey," he called out. "Want to go for a ride?" I hesitated. The old me would have jumped at the chance. But now, "Maybe another time," I said, forcing a smile as I hurried to my car. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. Not just of my bike, but of the person I used to be. The person who saw the best in people, who embraced adventure without fear. That night, I sat on my porch, looking out at the quiet street. A motorcycle roared by, the sound once so thrilling now sending a shiver down my spine. I wondered if I would ever feel that thrill again, or if the fear would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface. But as I watched the bike disappear into the distance, I made a decision. I couldn't let one bad experience define me. I couldn't let fear win. The next day, I asked my coworker about his bike, and when he offered again to take me for a ride, I took a deep breath and said yes. As we cruised down the open road, the wind in my face and the engine rumbling beneath me, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. The fear was still there, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind, but it no longer controlled me. I had faced my worst fears and come out the other side. I was changed, yes, but not broken. And as the miles rolled by, I realized that sometimes the only way past fear is through it. The open road was calling again, and this time I was ready to answer. The moment we heard the first scream echoing through the cave system, I knew our simple hiking trip had just become a fight for survival. What we'd discover in the depths of those caverns would haunt us for the rest of our lives, if we made it out alive. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. My friends, Jake, Lisa, and Mia, and I had been planning this hiking trip for months. We were all experienced outdoors enthusiasts, but none of us had ever explored the infamous Shadowmere Caves. The local legends surrounding the cave system had always intrigued us, tales of mysterious disappearances and strange noises in the night. We'd laughed them off as campfire stories meant to scare tourists. How wrong we were. The hike to the cave entrance was uneventful, filled with the usual banter and excitement of friends on an adventure. The weather was perfect, warm sunshine filtering through the dense forest canopy. As we approached the yawning mouth of the main cavern, a cool breeze carried the musty scent of damp earth and ancient stone. "Well, this is it," Jake said, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Shadowmere Caves. Last chance to back out." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Don't tell me you're buying into those silly ghost stories, Jake." "Of course not," he replied, a bit too quickly. "I was just saying, it's not too late to hit that brewery in town instead." Mia was already pulling out her headlamp. "No way. We didn't come all this way to chicken out now. Come on, let's go." I nodded in agreement, ignoring the slight twinge of unease in my gut. We'd come prepared with maps, extra batteries, first aid kits, everything we needed for a safe spelunking adventure. What could possibly go wrong? The first hour in the caves was breathtaking. Massive chambers opened up before us, their walls glittering with mineral deposits that caught the light of our headlamps. We carefully picked our way through narrow passages, marveling at the bizarre rock formations shaped by millennia of flowing water. It was when we reached a fork in the passage that things started to feel off. Our map showed only one path, but here were two identical tunnels stretching into the darkness. "That's weird," I muttered, double-checking the map. "This split isn't marked anywhere." Jake peered down both passages. "Maybe the map's outdated. Cave systems can change over time, right?" Lisa nodded. "True. So, which way?" We debated for a few minutes before deciding to take the left tunnel. It seemed to slope gently upward, which we hoped meant it would eventually lead us back to the surface. As we ventured deeper, the air grew noticeably colder. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and I found myself shivering despite the exertion of the hike. The walls of this tunnel were different, too, smoother, almost polished in places. And there was something else, a faint smell I couldn't quite place. "Does anyone else smell that?" Mia asked, voicing my thoughts. We all paused, sniffing the air. It was a musty odor, but with an underlying sweetness that was somehow worse. "Probably just some weird fungus," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. We pressed on, the tunnel gradually widening into a vast chamber. Our headlamps couldn't penetrate the full extent of the darkness. It was as we were crossing this chamber that we heard it, a scream, distant but unmistakable, echoing through the cave. We froze, exchanging wide-eyed looks of disbelief and fear. "What the hell was that?" Lisa whispered. Maybe it was just the wind," Mia suggested, her voice shaking. But we all knew it wasn't the wind. That scream had been human. "We should go back," Jake said, already turning around. "Right now." I was about to agree when we heard it again, closer this time. It wasn't a scream of fear or pain. It was a battle cry. Before we could react, figures emerged from the shadows at the edges of the chamber. They moved with an unnatural speed and grace, closing in on us from all sides. In the beam of my headlamp, I caught glimpses of pale, almost translucent skin and eyes that reflected the light like a cat's. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Mia's arm and pulling her towards the tunnel we'd come from. We sprinted back the way we came, the sound of pursuit close behind us. The smooth walls of the tunnel now seemed malevolent, as if the very cave was against us. We skidded around a corner and found ourselves face to face with a dead end that hadn't been there before. "This is impossible," Lisa gasped. "We came this way." But there was no time to puzzle it out. Our pursuers were getting closer. We pressed ourselves against the wall, desperately searching for any kind of escape route. That's when I saw it, a narrow crack in the rock face, barely visible in the shadows. "There!" I shouted, pointing. "We can squeeze through." One by one, we forced ourselves into the crevice. It was a tight fit, the rough stone scraping against our skin as we inched forward. I went last, and just as I pulled my legs in, I felt something grab at my ankle. I kicked out blindly and heard a hiss of pain. Whatever had hold of me let go, and I scrambled deeper into the crack. We emerged into another chamber, smaller than the last, but with multiple tunnels branching off in different directions. Without discussing it, we picked one at random and ran, our footsteps echoing off the walls. After what felt like hours of frantic flight, we finally stopped to catch our breath. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but the oppressive silence that replaced it was almost worse. What were those things?" Mia panted, her face pale in the glow of our headlamps. Nobody had an answer. We were lost, hunted, in a cave system that seemed to defy the laws of nature and logic. Our map was useless, our supplies dwindling, and our chances of finding our way out growing slimmer by the minute. As we huddled together, trying to decide our next move, a low growl echoed through the tunnel. It was followed by the scrape of claws on stone, growing closer. "We need to move," Jake whispered urgently. "Now." But as we turned to flee once more, we saw them, pale figures blocking our escape, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. They were humanoid, but with elongated limbs and fingers that ended in wicked claws. Their mouths were filled with needle-sharp teeth, bared in feral grins. We were trapped. Just as I was sure this was the end, a new sound filled the cave, a high-pitched, keening wail that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The creatures surrounding us recoiled, covering what passed for their ears. A blinding light flooded the chamber, and through my squinted eyes, I saw new figures entering the fray. They were tall, willowy beings that seemed to glow from within. In their hands, they held weapons that looked like they were made of pure light. What followed was a battle unlike anything I'd ever seen or could have imagined. The pale, feral creatures fought with savage ferocity, but they were no match for the glowing beings and their light weapons. In a matter of minutes, it was over. One of the glowing figures approached us. Up close, I could see that its face was eerily beautiful, with features that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. "You should not be here," it said, its voice resonating in my head rather than my ears. "This place is not for your kind." We got lost," I managed to stammer. "Please, we just want to go home." The being regarded us silently for a moment, then nodded. "We will guide you to the surface, but you must never return, and you must never speak of what you've seen here." In a daze, we followed our luminous saviors through the twisting tunnels. The journey passed in a blur, and before I knew it, we were stumbling out into the sunlight, blinking and disoriented. When we turned back, the cave entrance was gone, replaced by a solid rock face as if it had never existed. We never spoke about what happened in those caves, not even among ourselves. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear those inhuman screams echoing in my dreams, and I wonder about the war raging beneath our feet, in a world we were never meant to see. The next time someone suggests a cave exploration, I'll be the first to recommend that brewery instead. Some depths, I've learned, are better left unplumbed. The mysteries of the underground will remain just that, mysteries, and maybe, just maybe, that's for the best. The first flicker of the headlights in our rearview mirror filled me with relief. The second made me uneasy. By the third, as they grew larger and brighter, I knew with chilling certainty that whoever was behind us wasn't here to help. They were hunting us. It had started as a simple family road trip. My wife, Sarah, our 2 kids, Emily 8 and Max 6, and I had decided to take the scenic route to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. We'd been driving for hours, the kids getting restless in the back seat, when I saw a sign for a shortcut. Willow Creek Road, 30 miles shorter to Millbrook, it proclaimed in faded letters. Sarah had given me a skeptical look. "Are you sure about this, Dan? It's getting dark and we don't know the area." I'd brushed off her concerns. "It'll be fine. We'll save an hour at least. Plus, it'll be an adventure. Right, kids?" Emily and Max had cheered from the back seat, excited by the prospect of an adventure. If only I'd known what kind of adventure we were really in for. At first, the road seemed fine. A little rough, maybe, with more twists and turns than I'd expected, but nothing our SUV couldn't handle. But as we drove deeper into the forest, the trees pressing in on either side, I began to have second thoughts. The road narrowed, turning from asphalt to gravel, then to little more than a dirt track. Our headlights cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating a path that seemed to grow wilder with each passing mile. "Dan, I really think we should turn back," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "This doesn't feel right." I was about to agree when our engine made a sound that turned my blood to ice, a sputtering, coughing noise that I knew all too well meant trouble. "No, no, no," I muttered, easing off the gas, but it was too late. The engine gave one final, violent shudder and died, leaving us coasting to a stop in the middle of nowhere. For a moment, we sat in stunned silence, the sudden quiet broken only by the soft ping of the cooling engine. "Daddy?" Max's small voice came from the back seat. "Why did we stop?" I turned to face my family, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's okay, buddy. The car's just having a little problem. We'll figure it out." But as I stepped out to check under the hood, I knew we were in serious trouble. I'm no mechanic, but even I could see that this was beyond my abilities to fix. We were stranded. I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I'd see. No signal, of course. Sarah joined me outside, her face pale in the fading light. "What are we going to do, Dan?" I took a deep breath, trying to think logically. "Okay, we have some food and water in the cooler, blankets in the trunk. We'll be fine for the night. In the morning, I'll walk back to the main road, find some help." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We both knew that in the morning was a long time away. We did our best to make the kids comfortable, turning the back of the SUV into a makeshift bed. As they drifted off to sleep, Sarah and I sat in the front, talking in low voices about our options. That's when we saw the first flicker of light in the distance. Hope surged through me. Another car, someone who could help us. But as the lights grew closer, that hope turned to unease. The approaching vehicle was moving erratically, speeding up and slowing down, its headlights sweeping across the road as if searching for something or someone. "Dan," Sarah whispered, gripping my arm. "Something's not right." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Wake the kids, quietly. We need to get out of the car." As Sarah roused Emily and Max, I grabbed the emergency backpack from the trunk. Flashlight, first aid kit, some snacks, and a bottle of water. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. We had just made it to the tree line when the other vehicle came into view. It was a battered pickup truck, its engine roaring as it approached our stranded SUV. From our hiding spot, we watched as 2 men got out. Even in the dim light, I could see they were rough-looking characters, the kind you'd cross the street to avoid in the city. "Check the car," one of them barked. "They can't have gone far." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. Max whimpered softly, and I clamped my hand over his mouth, praying the men wouldn't hear. As they searched our car, their angry shouts growing louder with each passing moment, I knew we couldn't stay here. Sooner or later, they'd start searching the woods. "We need to move," I whispered to Sarah. "Deeper into the forest. Now." She nodded, her face a mask of fear and determination. Taking Emily's hand, she began to lead the way into the darkness. I followed with Max, constantly looking over my shoulder. We stumbled through the underbrush, trying to be as quiet as possible while putting distance between us and the road. The forest was alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the leaf litter. Every noise made us jump, sure that our pursuers were right behind us. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we stopped in a small clearing. The kids were exhausted, their faces streaked with tears. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emily whispered. Sarah pulled her close. "I know, sweetie, but we're going to be okay. Daddy and I won't let anything happen to you." I wished I felt as confident as I tried to sound. The truth was, I was terrified. We were lost in an unfamiliar forest, being hunted by men whose intentions I didn't want to imagine, with 2 young children to protect. It was a nightmare scenario, and I had no idea how to get us out of it. A sudden crack of a branch breaking nearby made us all freeze. I gestured for Sarah to take the kids and hide behind a fallen log, while I crouched behind a tree, my heart in my throat. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, swinging back and forth as heavy footsteps approached. I held my breath, praying that the kids would stay quiet. "I know you're out here," a gruff voice called out. "Make it easy on yourselves and come on out. We just want to talk." I didn't believe that for a second. These men hadn't chased us into the forest in the middle of the night just to talk. The footsteps grew closer. I could see the man now, his face half illuminated by his flashlight. He was big, with a scraggly beard and eyes that darted back and forth, searching. He was going to find us. It was only a matter of time. I had to do something. Taking a deep breath, I picked up a rock and threw it as far as I could in the opposite direction. It clattered against a tree, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. The man's head snapped towards the noise. "Got you now," he muttered, moving away from us. As soon as he was out of sight, I rushed to Sarah and the kids. We have to keep moving," I whispered. "They're spreading out, searching the woods." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. We set off again, moving as quietly as we could, constantly alert for any sign of our pursuers. As we walked, my mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. We couldn't keep this up forever. The kids were exhausted, and honestly, so were Sarah and I. We needed help, and soon. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, too steady to be a flashlight. A house? A ranger station? Whatever it was our best hope. "Look," I whispered, pointing. "Light, we're going to head that way, okay?" We moved faster now, hope giving us renewed energy. The light grew brighter, and soon we could make out the shape of a small cabin. Just as we reached the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, I heard shouts behind us. They'd picked up our trail. "Run!" I yelled, abandoning all attempts at stealth. We sprinted across the open ground, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind us. Emily stumbled, and I scooped her up without breaking stride. We reached the cabin door just as our pursuers broke from the tree line. Sarah pounded on the door, screaming for help. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the door flew open, revealing an older man holding a shotgun. "Get in," he barked, his eyes widening as he took in our terrified faces and the men running towards us. We didn't need to be told twice. We dove inside, and the man slammed the door shut behind us, throwing the bolt just as our pursuers reached the porch. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his shotgun still at the ready. "What's going on here?" Between gasps for breath, we managed to explain our situation. The man's face hardened as he listened. Damn Hawkins boys, he muttered. Been terrorizing folks around here for years. He moved to an old-fashioned phone on the wall, the first working phone we'd seen in hours, and started dialing. "This is Tom Granger out on Old Mill Road," he said into the receiver. "Got a family here being chased by the Hawkins gang. Send everyone you've got." As we waited for the police to arrive, huddled in the safety of Tom's cabin, I held my family close. We were safe, at least for now. But I knew that the memory of this night would stay with us for a long time. Our shortcut had turned into the longest night of our lives. A nightmare that could have ended much differently if not for a bit of luck and the kindness of a stranger. As I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching, I made a silent vow. No more shortcuts, no more reckless decisions. From now on, the safety of my family would always come first. The flashing lights of the police cars lit up the clearing, and for the first time since our car had broken down, I felt like I could breathe again. We had survived. We were together. And that, I realized, was the greatest adventure of all.